I met Emma on a night I almost didn't leave my apartment. It was one of those bitterly cold evenings in January when the wind cuts through every layer you put on. My buddy Derek had been begging me all week to join him at a friend's birthday dinner. I'd said no 3 times already, but that night he called and guilt-tripped me into going. "You never know, man," he said. "Sometimes the nights you don't want to go out end up being the best ones." I laughed it off, but I went, and Derek wasn't wrong. The restaurant was packed, dimly lit, the kind of place that served cocktails in glasses that looked too fragile to hold. I didn't know half the people at the table, which is why I noticed her right away, because she didn't seem to know many of them either. She was sitting across from me, dark hair falling into her face as she read the menu. When the waiter came, she ordered pasta but asked about every ingredient like she was preparing for a food competition. People rolled their eyes, but she just smiled, unfazed. Halfway through the meal, conversation splintered into smaller groups, and she and I started talking. Her name was Emma. She worked at a nonprofit that helped with housing for low-income families. I asked her why she chose that field, and she shrugged. "Because I know what it feels like to not have much," she said simply. There was no bragging in her voice, no attempt to sound noble. Just truth. The more we talked, the more I realized how different she was from anyone I'd met recently. She wasn't trying to impress me, but somehow she was. I walked her to her car at the end of the night. Snow was falling in soft flakes, catching in her hair. She laughed about how clumsy she was in heels and nearly slipped on the icy sidewalk. Instinctively, I grabbed her hand. She didn't pull away. That moment felt like the start of something I couldn't name yet. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other. Not in a flashy, whirlwind kind of way. It was quieter than that. Coffee dates on Saturday mornings. Walks through the park with her pointing out dogs and guessing their names. She'd laugh when she guessed wrong and whisper conspiratorially when she guessed right, as if the dogs had told her themselves. It was easy, effortless. But the first time I realized Emma wasn't just another person I was dating came one night when I had the worst day at work. A project I'd been leading collapsed, my boss tore into me, and by the time I got home, I just wanted to curl up in bed and shut out the world. Emma showed up at my door with takeout from my favorite diner. I hadn't even told her I'd had a bad day. She said she just had a feeling. We sat on the floor of my apartment, eating burgers and fries out of greasy paper bags. She didn't try to fix anything. She didn't offer hollow encouragement. She just listened while I vented, then leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You're allowed to have bad days. You don't have to be strong all the time." No one had ever said that to me before. Weeks turned into months. Emma had this way of making ordinary moments feel special. She dragged me into thrift stores to find treasures, which usually meant chipped mugs or old board games. She'd sit cross-legged on my couch, humming while she worked on crosswords she rarely finished. And slowly, I noticed how much she gave to everyone around her. One night, I went to pick her up from work. She was late, which wasn't unusual. When she finally came out, she looked exhausted. I asked her what kept her, and she admitted she'd been staying late to help a single mom fill out forms for housing assistance. "You don't get paid extra for that," I said. She just smiled. Not everything has to be about money. That was Emma, always giving, rarely asking. But life has a way of testing people, even the strongest ones. About 6 months into dating, Emma called me late one night, her voice shaky. Her younger brother, Caleb, had gotten into trouble. He'd been caught shoplifting, and the police had called her because their parents were out of the picture. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "He's only 16. I told her I'd come with her. We spent the night at the station, waiting for paperwork, talking to officers, trying to keep Caleb calm. Emma didn't raise her voice once. She didn't shame him. She just sat beside him, holding his hand, telling him she loved him no matter what. On the drive home, she finally broke down. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm all he has. If I fail him." I pulled over, turned to her, and said, "You're not failing him. You're the only reason he even has a chance." She looked at me, then really looked at me like she was seeing me in a new way. That was the night I realized I was falling in love with her. But love isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's being there when things get messy. Emma had a way of carrying everyone's burdens but her own. She'd work herself to exhaustion, then brush it off like it was nothing. I started noticing how tired she looked, how she'd zone out in the middle of conversations. One evening, I asked her straight out, "When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" She laughed it off. "I don't need much." That's not what I asked. She looked at me, her smile faltering. "I don't even remember." So I made it my mission to remind her she mattered too. I started planning little surprises. A picnic in the park, a day trip to the beach, even just a night in with her favorite movies queued up. She always protested at first. "You didn't have to do this," but the way her eyes lit up told me she needed it more than she admitted. The first time she said, "I love you," it was almost by accident. We were cooking together in my kitchen, music playing in the background, both of us laughing because I just burned the garlic bread. She handed me a glass of wine, shook her head, and said, "God, I love you." She froze, eyes wide, like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. I didn't let her panic. I just smiled and said, "Good, because I love you too." The relief on her face was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. But even with love, challenges kept coming. Caleb struggled to stay out of trouble. Bills piled up for Emma because her nonprofit job didn't pay much. Some days, I catch her staring off into space, shoulders heavy with weight she didn't talk about. That's when I knew, if this was going to work, it couldn't just be her carrying everyone. I had to carry her too, and I was ready to. That night, lying in bed with her breathing softly beside me, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to be the guy she dated. I was going to be the guy who stood beside her no matter how hard it got. Because Emma wasn't just someone I loved. She was someone worth fighting for. And deep down, I knew the real test of that promise was still coming. Life with Emma was like walking a line between light and shadow. There were so many moments of brightness, her laugh, her compassion, the way she made small things feel like gifts. But there were also darker stretches, challenges that didn't fade just because we loved each other. I learned quickly that loving Emma meant also loving Caleb, her younger brother. He wasn't a bad kid, but he carried anger the way other people carried backpacks, always strapped on, weighing him down. Losing their parents, so young, had left scars he didn't know how to heal. One Saturday morning, I showed up at Emma's apartment with bagels and coffee. Instead of finding her humming in the kitchen, I found her standing in the hallway, arms crossed, voice sharp. Caleb was inside his room, yelling back, "You can't keep skipping school, Caleb. This isn't a joke. Why do you care? It's not like school's going to fix anything," he shot back. The tension was thick enough to choke on. I set the food down quietly, walked over, and knocked on Caleb's door. "Mind if I come in?" There was silence, then a muttered, "Whatever." I stepped inside. His room looked like any teenager's, clothes on the floor, posters peeling from the walls. Caleb was sitting on his bed, fists clenched. "You know," I said carefully, "when I was your age, I thought school didn't matter either. But here I am, still wishing I'd taken it more seriously." He glared at me. "Easy for you to say. You had parents." That hit me hard. I didn't argue. I just nodded. "You're right. I had advantages you didn't. But you know what? You've got Emma, and she's fighting for you harder than anyone I've ever seen fight for family." His eyes flickered, but he didn't answer. Later, Emma pulled me aside, tears in her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how to reach him anymore." I squeezed her hand. "We'll reach him together." The together part became real in ways I hadn't expected. One night, Emma called me after midnight. Her voice was frantic. "Caleb's not home. He's not answering his phone." I didn't even think. I grabbed my jacket and drove over. We searched the streets, calling his name, checking the spots he liked to hang out. Finally, we found him sitting alone at a playground, hood pulled over his head, staring at the ground. Emma rushed to him, but instead of yelling, she sat down beside him in the cold. "Caleb, you scared me." "I didn't ask you to come looking," he muttered. "You don't have to ask," she whispered. "I'll always look for you." I watched as he finally broke down, tears spilling, confessing that he felt lost, that he didn't see a future for himself. Emma held him like she could shield him from the world. And in that moment, I realized just how much strength it took to keep loving when love didn't feel easy. Those nights tested us, but they also drew us closer. Emma began to lean on me more, something she'd resisted at first. She'd call when she needed help with groceries, or when she wanted me to come to Caleb's school meetings. Each time, I showed up, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted her to know she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. Still, Emma wasn't used to relying on anyone. One evening, after Caleb stormed out following another argument, she turned to me and said, "What if I'm not enough for him? What if I can't save him?" I cupped her face gently. "You don't have to save him alone. That's what love is, not carrying the weight by yourself." Her eyes softened. For the first time, I think she believed me. But love isn't just tested by family. It's tested by life itself. A few months later, Emma got devastating news. Her nonprofit lost funding. Half the staff, including her, were let go. She tried to hide it from me at first, pretending everything was fine. But I knew something was wrong when she skipped our Friday dinner without a word. I showed up at her place anyway. She was sitting on the couch, eyes red, surrounded by stacks of resumes she hadn't sent. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "Because I didn't want you to see me like this. I've always been the one who helps. I don't know how to be the one who needs help." I sat beside her, took her hand, and said, "Needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And I love every human part of you." For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she broke down, sobbing into my chest. It was raw, vulnerable, unguarded. And I held her until she finally fell asleep. The weeks that followed were hard. Money was tight for her, stress piled up, and Caleb's moods didn't improve. But those weeks also showed me the depth of who Emma was. Instead of giving up, she started tutoring kids in the neighborhood for free while looking for a new job. "I can't sit around doing nothing," she told me. "These kids still need someone." Watching her, I realized something. Emma didn't just make me want to be with her. She made me want to be better. One evening, after helping her grade papers for her tutoring kids, I pulled out a small notebook. "What's that?" she asked. "Our list," I said. She tilted her head. "Our list of everything we're going to do together. Not just now, but later. Dreams, goals, stupid little adventures. Things to look forward to." Her smile was small, but real. "Like what?" I flipped it open. "Road trip across the country. Adopt a dog. Learn how to cook something fancier than pasta. Maybe even," I hesitated, then grinned, "maybe even get married someday." Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she grabbed the pen and wrote, "Help Caleb graduate." And just like that, our list began. The night of Caleb's graduation, a year later, I stood beside Emma in the crowded gymnasium. When his name was called, we both jumped to our feet, cheering like lunatics. Caleb grinned from the stage, holding up his diploma like a trophy. Emma had tears streaming down her face. She turned to me and whispered, "We did it." I shook my head, pulling her close. "No, you did it. I just had the privilege of standing beside you." She kissed me right there, in the middle of the crowd, and for once Caleb didn't roll his eyes. He just smiled, like he finally understood what love looked like. That summer, Emma got a new job, one that paid better but still let her help families in need. Caleb started community college, something Emma hadn't dared to dream of a year earlier. And as for us, our list kept growing. Trips, plans, promises. But the truth was, the best parts weren't on any list. They were in the small things, late-night talks, shared laughter, the quiet comfort of knowing we had each other's backs. Love hadn't been easy. It had been tested, stretched, pushed to its limits. But it hadn't broken. It had deepened. One night, lying in bed, Emma whispered, "You saved me." I kissed her forehead. "No, you saved yourself. I just held your hand while you did it." She smiled, eyes heavy with sleep, and whispered, "I love you." And in that moment, I knew I'd love her for the rest of my life. If this story made you believe in love that grows through struggles, hit that like button and subscribe, because every story here will remind you why love is worth holding on to. I didn't expect the knock on my door that Sunday morning to change my entire life. I was halfway through reheating leftover pizza when I opened the door to find my little sister, Lily, standing there with her 2 kids, a suitcase, and eyes that had cried all night. She didn't say a word at first, just stared at me like she wasn't sure she was welcome. "Come inside," I said instantly, stepping aside. She walked in like her legs were made of lead. The kids clung to her, both too quiet for children their age. I closed the door, heart pounding, because I already knew something was wrong, really wrong. What happened? I asked, keeping my voice calm, even though panic was rising in my chest. She set the suitcase down, rubbed her temples, and whispered, "Mark kicked us out." Her husband, my brother-in-law, the man I'd tolerated for years because Lily swore he was good deep down, even though I'd seen the way his temper flared, the way her smile dimmed whenever he was around. "Be what?" I nearly shouted. "Please, not in front of the kids," she said quickly, glancing at them. So I bit my tongue. I crouched down and smiled at my niece and nephew. "Hey, you too hungry? I've got pizza." Their faces lit up for the first time since they'd walked in. As they dug into reheated slices, I pulled Lily into the kitchen. "You're staying here," I told her firmly. No arguments. Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to be a burden. You're my sister. You'll never be a burden." The first weeks were rough. Lily was on edge, jumping whenever the phone rang, constantly apologizing for taking up space. The kids struggled too. Nightmares, tantrums, clinging to her like she might disappear. I tried to make my small 2-bedroom apartment feel like home for them. I gave Lily my room and crashed on a couch. I set up blankets on the floor for the kids so they could feel like they were camping. I picked up extra shifts at work to cover groceries. But no matter what I did, I could feel the tension radiating from Lily. She barely slept. She barely ate. And every time the kids asked when they were going back home, she'd plaster on a fake smile that broke my heart. One night, after the kids were asleep, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, staring into her tea. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "You don't have to do this alone anymore. You've got me." Her lip trembled, but she nodded. Slowly, things started to shift. The kids adjusted to a new routine, school drop-offs, homework at my kitchen table, bedtime stories squished together on the couch. Lily got a part-time job at a bakery down the street, her first step toward independence. And for the first time in years, I saw her laugh without forcing it. It wasn't perfect. Money was tight. Space was cramped. Sometimes the kids fought so loud the neighbors banged on the wall. But it was ours. It was safe. And in the middle of it all, something unexpected happened. Imitana. She was the teacher in my nephew's school. We first spoke when I came to pick him up, and she pulled me aside, saying, "He's a bright kid. He just needs a little extra reassurance right now." I explained the situation, bracing myself for pity. But instead, she nodded with this quiet understanding. "Kids are resilient," she said. "And with family like you, he'll be okay." There was something about her presence, calm, steady, that stayed with me. And over the next few weeks, every time I picked the kids up, she'd give me updates, little encouragements, sometimes slipping in a joke that made me laugh even after the hardest days. Lily noticed, of course. One evening, as we washed dishes, she smirked and said, "So, what are you asking the teacher out?" I nearly dropped a plate. "What?" "No, she's just nice." "MHM," Lily teased. "Nice." And cute. And clearly interested. I rolled my eyes, but inside, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. Hannah and I eventually did go out for coffee. What was supposed to be 30 minutes turned into 3 hours. We talked about everything: family, childhood, books, the chaos of teaching. She listened when I explained Lily's situation, not with judgment, but with genuine care. "You've taken on a lot," she said softly. "I couldn't just let her drown," I replied. "That says everything about who you are," she said, and the way she looked at me made my chest ache in the best way. But love stories don't unfold without obstacles. Mark, my sister's ex, didn't stay quiet. He started showing up outside the bakery where Lily worked, texting her nonstop, leaving angry voicemails. She blocked him, but the damage was done. Fear crept back in her eyes. One night, after she tucked the kids in, she whispered to me, "What if he tries to take them? What if he shows up here?" I took a deep breath. "Then he'll have to go through me first." She gave me a sad smile. "You can't fix everything, you know." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but I'll damn well try." Things came to a head one rainy Friday evening. I came home from work to find Lily shaking, phone in her hand. "He says he's going to the court," she stammered. "He's going to fight for custody." The kids were in the other room, blissfully unaware, but I could see the terror in her eyes. I pulled her into a hug, held her as tightly as I could, and said, "Then we'll fight too. You're not alone in this, Lily. We'll get a lawyer. We'll do whatever it takes." She sobbed into my chest, and for the first time, I realized just how much she'd been carrying and how much I had to carry with her. At the same time, Hannah was becoming more and more a part of our lives. She helped the kids with homework, dropped off baked goods just because, and even joined us for family movie nights. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, she stayed behind to help clean up. As we stood in the kitchen, she looked around at the messy plates, the toy-strewn floor, the blanket fort still standing in the living room, and said, "This feels like a home." I swallowed hard. "It's not much. It's everything," she said softly. I didn't know what came over me, but I kissed her right then. And when she kissed me back, it felt like every burden I'd been carrying suddenly got a little lighter. But even as love bloomed, the shadow of Mark loomed over us. The custody battle was real. The tension was real. And the fear of losing everything we'd built together hung in the air like a storm cloud. Still, as I tucked my niece and nephew into bed that night, watching them smile sleepily as Lily read them a story, I made a silent promise. I would do whatever it took to keep this family safe. Because this wasn't just Lily's fight anymore. It was mine too. The storm hit sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after Lily told me Mark was threatening custody, the papers showed up. A knock on the door, a man in a suit, and suddenly my sister was holding a stack of documents that said Mark wanted full custody of the kids. She looked pale as she handed them to me. "He's going to take them away from me." I scanned the papers, my stomach sinking. His lawyer painted Lily as unstable, claimed she had no financial stability, and hinted that she'd been emotionally unfit to care for the kids. All lies, but lies on official paper carry weight. I clenched my jaw. We're not letting this happen. The next weeks were chaos. I drove Lily to meetings with lawyers. I picked up every extra shift I could help pay for fees. The kids asked why their dad wasn't around, and Lily dodged the questions with practiced grace, but I could see the cracks forming in her smile. One night, I found her crying in the kitchen, shoulders shaking silently. "I can't lose them," she whispered. "They're the only good thing I've done in my life." I sat beside her, wrapped an arm around her, and said, "Then we'll fight, and we'll win, because the truth is on your side." She looked at me with tired eyes. "You really believe that?" I squeezed her hand. "I have to. For you. For them." The first court hearing felt like stepping into a nightmare. Mark walked in wearing a tailored suit, smug as ever, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he'd chew us up and spit us out. Lily trembled beside me, clutching her folder of documents like it was a lifeline. When Mark testified, he spoke with fake charm, claiming he only wanted what's best for the children. My blood boiled as he lied about Lily being irresponsible, unstable, even reckless. But then Lily spoke. Her voice shook at first, but then she looked at the judge and said, "I may not have much, but I have always been there for my children. I'm her safe place. They're home, and I will never stop fighting for them." I felt tears sting my eyes as I watched her find her strength. Outside the courtroom, Hannah was waiting. She squeezed my hand, whispered encouragement to Lily, and even hugged the kids when they ran into her arms. "You've got more people in your corner than you realize," she told Lily. And she was right. Our neighbors had written letters about how devoted Lily was. Her boss from the bakery even testified that she was reliable and hardworking. Piece by piece, the truth started to outweigh the lies. But Mark didn't back down. One night, as I was leaving work, I found him waiting by my car. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he sneered. "Taking in your sister, playing dad to kids that aren't yours?" I glared at him. "I don't need to play dad. I just need to protect them from people like you." His smile turned cold. "This isn't over." For a moment, I thought he might actually swing at me. But then he walked away, leaving me shaking with anger. The final hearing came on a gray Monday morning. The courtroom was packed. The kids were at school, thankfully shielded from the storm. Lily took the stand one last time, and when her lawyer asked why she should keep custody, she didn't talk about Mark or money or her job. She talked about love. "My children need me," she said, her voice strong. "They need stability. They need to wake up in the same bed, eat breakfast with the same people, come home from school to a place that feels safe. I may not be perfect, but I am their mother, and nothing will ever change that. The silence in that courtroom was heavy. Even the judge seemed moved. When the decision finally came, my heart nearly stopped. Custody will remain with the mother, Lily Bennett. I exhaled so hard my chest hurt. Lily collapsed into tears, and I held her, whispering, "You did it. You won." Afterward, we all went home. The kids came running through the door, laughing and yelling about their day at school, unaware of just how close we'd come to losing it all. Lily watched them with tears streaming down her face. "They'll never know how scared I was," she whispered. "Good," I said. "That's how it should be." Weeks passed, and life settled into something new. Lily grew steadier, more confident. The kids smiled more. Our little apartment, once crowded and chaotic, now felt like a home full of warmth instead of fear. And through it all, Hannah was there. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed and Lily was curled up on the couch with a book, Hannah and I stood in the kitchen. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, looked at me, and said, "You've built something here, something worth holding on to." I swallowed, emotions catching in my throat. "I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled, stepped closer, and whispered, "Maybe you don't have to do anything without me anymore." I kissed her, and in that moment, I knew my life had changed forever. We didn't just survive the storm, we came out stronger. My sister found her voice again. The kids had their home. And me? I found love in the most unexpected place. And maybe that's the point. Sometimes the family you fight for ends up giving you more than you ever thought you deserved. If you felt this story, tap like and subscribe. It helps me keep bringing more stories that matter. I never thought a single phone call could change the entire direction of my life. It was a Tuesday night, the kind where nothing special happens. I just finished dinner and was settling into the couch when my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach twist. It was my dad. We weren't close. In fact, I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 3 years. He'd never been the warm, fatherly type. Growing up, he was strict, distant, and after Mom passed, he buried himself in work and left me to figure out the rest on my own. Our relationship faded into silence, and part of me thought I was okay with that. But something about that call, I couldn't ignore it. When I answered, his voice was quieter than I remembered, shaky almost. "So, I need your help." I drove over that night, unsure what I'd find. The old house looked smaller than I remembered, as if time had shrunk it. When he opened the door, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, thinner, fragile in a way I'd never seen before. "I'm sick," he admitted after a long pause. "The doctors, it's serious. I can't handle everything on my own anymore." The words hit me like a punch. This was the man who never asked for help, who barked orders and demanded perfection. And now he was standing in front of me, vulnerable and scared. "I wouldn't blame you if you walked away," he said softly. But I had to try. And right there, I had a choice. Keep holding on to the resentment, or step in and see if there was still something left worth saving. The first few weeks were awkward. I started visiting every evening, helping him with meals, driving him to appointments, cleaning the house he once demanded I keep spotless as a kid. At first, neither of us said much. He'd sit in his chair, quiet, while I worked around him. But slowly, little cracks began to show in the silence. One evening, while I was cooking, he spoke up. "You always liked spaghetti," he said, almost to himself. "Your mom made it every Friday night." I froze. It was the first time he'd mentioned her in years. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I remember." He nodded, eyes distant. "She would have been proud of you." For a man who had never given me more than a rare nod of approval, those words felt like a dam breaking. As weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. I started looking forward to our talks. He told me stories I'd never heard. How he met Mom, the dreams he'd once had before life wore him down, even silly little things like how he used to sneak extra cookies from the jar when no one was looking. It was like meeting a new version of him, one I never knew existed. But there were still hard days. His illness made him frustrated, and sometimes that old sharpness came out. We argued, clashed over little things, and I found myself slipping back into the hurt kid I used to be. One night, after a particularly rough argument, I stood up to leave. Maybe this was a mistake, I muttered. But as I grabbed my jacket, his voice broke behind me. Please don't give up on me. I turned, and for the first time, I saw him not as the intimidating father of my childhood, but as a man who was terrified of dying alone. And I stayed. The turning point came one Sunday afternoon. We were sitting on the porch, the sun dipping low, and he asked me a question I'll never forget. Do you hate me? The silence stretched. I thought about the years of distance, the harsh words, the empty house after Mom died. And then I thought about the man sitting in front of me now, broken, but trying. No, I said finally. I don't hate you. I wanted to. But the truth is, I just wanted my dad back. His eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Taking care of him wasn't easy. There were nights I felt exhausted, angry, even wishing I could go back to my own life without this weight. But then there were moments, small, powerful moments, that made it worth it. Like when he laughed at a joke I made, or when he asked me about my life, genuinely listening for the first time, or when he admitted that letting me walk away years ago was his biggest regret. Those moments stitched together something that had been torn apart for so long. One evening, after tucking him into bed, I sat alone in the living room and realized something that made me choke up. I wasn't just taking care of my father. I was finally building the relationship I'd spent my whole life wanting. And even if time was short, even if the ending was already written, at least I know we found our way back to each other before it was too late. The months that followed felt like living in a space suspended between two worlds. One where life looked ordinary on the outside, and another where every moment was fragile, fleeting. Dad's health declined slowly, almost like time was deliberately stretching itself out to give us a chance to catch up on all the conversations we'd missed over the years. Each day became a rhythm of doctor visits, medication schedules, meals I prepared, and quiet evenings where we sat together, filling the silence with memories. One night, as I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, he shuffled in and leaned against the counter. Do you remember the treehouse in the backyard? He asked, his voice lighter than usual. I laughed. You mean the death trap you nailed together with 2x4s and a dream? He chuckled, a deep sound I didn't hear often enough. Hey, it stood for 10 years, didn't it? That's an accomplishment. I shook my head, smiling. You wouldn't let me climb up there unless I wore a helmet. Because you were reckless, he said, pointing a finger at me. Always climbing too high, running too fast. You gave me gray hair before I hit 40. For the first time, it felt like we weren't just father and son trying to repair something broken. We were friends, two people sharing a moment, equal in laughter. But there were harder nights too. Nights when his body betrayed him, and he cursed under his breath at the pain. Nights when I sat outside on the porch, fighting tears because I didn't want him to see me break. One evening, I heard him groaning softly from his room. When I rushed in, he looked at me with wet eyes. I don't want to be a burden to you, he whispered. Those words cut me deeper than anything. You're not a burden, I told him firmly. You're my dad, and this is the least I can do for everything you gave me, even when it wasn't perfect. His hand trembled as he reached out and gripped mine. I wish I'd said that to you more often when you were younger, that you weren't a burden to me either. It was such a simple thing, but it unraveled years of silence between us. As time passed, I started noticing the little ways he showed his gratitude. One day, I found a stack of old photo albums on the coffee table. He had dug them out from the closet and left them open to specific pages. Pictures of me as a kid, grinning with chocolate smeared on my face, standing proudly with a science fair ribbon, holding Mom's hand at the park. He had bookmarked them with sticky notes. On one note, he had scribbled, "My favorite picture of you." I stared at that note for a long time. It felt like he was giving me the words he'd never been able to say out loud. One afternoon, we sat on the porch again, the same place where he'd once asked me if I hated him. This time, he was quieter, almost thoughtful. You know, he said finally, I used to watch you sleep when you were a kid. I'd come home late from work, exhausted, but I'd peek in your room, just to make sure you were breathing, safe. I never told you that because, well, I didn't think it mattered. But it mattered to me. I swallowed hard. It would have mattered to me too. He nodded, regret flickering across his face. I wasted so much time. I thought being tough made me a good father. I thought providing was enough. But I forgot that you needed me to just be there. Hearing him admit that, after all these years, was both painful and healing. "Dad," I said quietly, "you're here now. That's what matters." One evening in late summer, he asked if I could drive him somewhere. "No doctors," he assured me with a mischievous glint in his eye. I raised an eyebrow, but agreed. He directed me to the old baseball field where he used to coach my Little League games. The place was run down, the bleachers rusting, weeds breaking through the dirt. But when we pulled up, his eyes lit up like he was 30 years younger. "I used to bring you here on Saturdays," he said, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "You had the worst swing in the league, but damn, you were determined." I laughed. "That's because you yelled every time I missed the ball." His smile faded into something softer. "I thought I was pushing you to be better, but now I think I just made you scared to fail." I didn't know what to say, so I put a hand on his shoulder. "You did what you thought was best. And honestly, I still love playing. Because you were there." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, as if trying to take in every detail of the field one last time. The decline hit harder in the fall. His movements slowed, his voice grew weaker, and the laughter that had started to return became rarer. But even then, we found ways to stay connected. I'd read to him, sometimes from books, sometimes old letters Mom had written. He'd listen with his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. One night, as I finished reading, he opened his eyes and whispered, "Promise me something." "Anything," I said. "Don't let your life become all about regrets. Love people while you can. Tell them how you feel before it's too late. Don't make my mistakes." I nodded, throat tight. "I promise." The day it happened, the house was quieter than ever. He had been sleeping more and more, slipping in and out of dreams. That morning, I sat by his bed, holding his hand, just in case he woke up. At one point, his eyes fluttered open, and he looked at me with surprising clarity. "You're a good man," he whispered. "Better than I ever was. I'm proud of you." I squeezed his hand, tears streaming down my face. "I love you, Dad." His lips curved into the faintest smile before he drifted back into sleep. And sometime in the stillness of the night, he slipped away for good. The funeral was small, quiet, just family and a few friends. I gave the eulogy, something I never thought I'd have the strength to do. But when I stood there, looking out at the faces in the pews, I didn't talk about the years of silence or the mistakes. I talked about spaghetti dinners, tree houses, baseball fields, and the man who in the final chapter of his life found his way back to his son. Afterward, as I stood by his grave, I realized something. He hadn't just given me closure. He'd given me a reason to live differently, to forgive faster, to love deeper, to never let pride get in the way of connection. Life moved on, but he stayed with me in little ways. In the recipes I cooked, in the photo albums I kept on my shelf, in the echoes of his voice when I caught myself laughing the way he used to. And every time I think back to that night, he called me out of the blue. I'm grateful I picked up, because that single phone call gave me something I never thought I'd have again. My dad. If this story touched you, tap like and subscribe. It helps me keep bringing you stories that stay with you. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary the night I pulled over on the side of the road. It was raining, one of those heavy spring storms that make the world blur behind a curtain of water. My wipers were working overtime, my headlights cutting narrow paths through the dark, when I noticed a car parked awkwardly on a shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked in the distance like a desperate signal for help. I could have kept driving. Most people did. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe conscience, made me slow down. When I pulled up behind the car, I saw a figure struggling with the hood. A young woman, drenched to the bone, her hair plastered against her cheeks. She looked equal parts frustrated and defeated, the kind of expression you wear when life has already beaten you down that day. I rolled down my window. "Need a hand?" She turned, startled, but her eyes softened with relief. "Honestly, yeah, my car just died. And of course, I left my phone charger at home." I parked, grabbed my umbrella, and stepped out into the storm. Up close, I noticed her shivering, hugging her arms around herself. She couldn't have been more than a couple years younger than me. Mind if I take a look? I asked, nodding toward the car. Be my guest, she said with a half smile. The engine was as dead as it looked, and I wasn't much of a mechanic. Still, I fiddled with the battery cables, tried the ignition again. Nothing. Yeah, I sighed. This isn't going anywhere tonight. But I can give you a ride, if you don't mind trusting a stranger. She studied me for a moment, as if weighing her options. The rain pelted harder, and she finally nodded. Stranger with an umbrella beats, sitting in a broken car in a thunderstorm. I'll take my chances. On the drive, I learned her name was Emily. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, had just finished a double shift, and was on her way home when her car gave out. You really didn't have to stop, she said at one point, glancing at me. Most people wouldn't. I shrugged. Most people should. That road's not exactly safe at night. She smiled faintly, the exhaustion still clinging to her features. Well, thank you. You might have saved me from getting soaked, or worse. We drove in silence for a bit after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something about her presence, warm, grounded, that made the storm outside feel less chaotic. When I dropped her off at her apartment building, she hesitated before getting out. Can I at least buy you a coffee sometime? For, rescuing me? I grinned. I never turned down coffee. That coffee turned into a regular thing. At first, it was just gratitude, her way of repaying me. But then it became something else. We'd meet at a little cafe near the hospital on her days off. She'd tell me stories about her patients, heartbreaking ones, funny ones, moments that reminded me just how much compassion she carried. I'd tell her about my job in IT, my love for hiking, the weird quirks of my family. Somewhere between sips of lattes and the sound of rain tapping against cafe windows, we built something unspoken. One evening, I found her sitting at her usual spot, looking more tired than ever. Rough day, I asked, sliding into the seat across from her. She nodded, her eyes heavy. Lost a patient today. Little boy. We tried everything, but her voice cracked, and she quickly looked down. I didn't know what to say. Words felt useless in that moment. So I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. We sat there in silence, her thumb brushing lightly against my fingers, and I realized something. I didn't just want to be the guy who stopped for her on the side of the road. I wanted to be the one she leaned on when storms, literal or otherwise, came crashing down. Weeks turned into months, and our lives started overlapping in ways that felt natural. I'd drive her to work sometimes when her car was acting up. She'd bring me takeout when I stayed late at the office. We weren't officially anything, but it was more than friendship. My family noticed too. My sister cornered me one Sunday after dinner. You've been smiling at your phone a lot lately, she teased. Who is she? I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't hide the grin. Her name's Emily. Her eyebrows shot up. So if it's serious. I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I think it is. The real turning point came one night when Emily called me in tears. Her father had collapsed at home, rushed to the ER where she worked. She was torn between being the professional nurse and the terrified daughter. I dropped everything and went straight to the hospital. When I found her pacing the hallway, I wrapped her in a hug. She clung to me like I was the only thing keeping her upright. Hours later, when the doctors said her father would recover, she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. She turned to me, her face streaked with tears, and whispered, I don't know what I would have done without you. In that moment, I realized I didn't just want to be her support. I want to be part of her family, her life, everything. From there, things deepened. We started spending holidays together, blending our families awkwardly, but beautifully. My mom adored her, my dad asked her too many questions about nursing, and my sister treated her like a best friend. Emily's family, despite their own struggles, welcomed me warmly. Her dad, recovered and grateful, pulled me aside once and said, You were there for her when I couldn't be. That means more than you know. It hit me then. This wasn't just about romance. It was about building something bigger than ourselves. Two people helping each other through storms, finding home in places they didn't expect. One night, after a long day, Emily and I sat on the same porch swing where I'd grown up. The air was warm, crickets humming in the distance. She leaned her head against my shoulder. Do you ever think about how weird it is? She asked softly. If my car hadn't broken down that night, we might never have met. I smiled, kissing the top of her head. Sometimes the worst nights bring the best things. She tilted her face up to look at me, her eyes glistening in the porch light. And without another word, we shared our first kiss, gentle, steady, like it had been waiting for us all along. That was the beginning of something real. And even though storms still came, at work, in life, we faced them together, knowing that sometimes stopping for a stranger changes everything. Life with Emily wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, I was learning, was so much better than perfect. After that first kiss on the porch swing, things between us shifted. There was no dramatic conversation, no need to define every detail. We just slipped into each other's lives more fully. She left her toothbrush at my place. I learned how she liked her coffee. 2 sugars, splash of cream. She figured out I couldn't function before 9 a.m. without a strong cup. But with closeness came challenges too. Emily's hours at the hospital were brutal. Sometimes she'd work 3 nights in a row, and I wouldn't see her for days. When we finally did get time together, she was exhausted, worn thin by the endless needs of her patients. One evening, she collapsed onto my couch after a particularly grueling shift. "Rough day?" I asked, handing her a glass of water. She shook her head, eyes heavy. "Rough week. Lost 2 patients back to back. And I feel like I'm never enough. No matter how hard I work, it's never enough." I sat down beside her, pulling her into my arms. "You give more than enough, Em. You can't carry the whole world on your shoulders." She buried her face against my chest. "Sometimes I wonder why I chose this job." I stroked her hair gently. "Because you were born to help people, but you don't have to do it alone anymore." That night, she fell asleep in my arms, and I promised myself something. I would be her anchor, the one who steadied her when she felt like she was drowning. But being someone's anchor isn't always easy. There were nights when I felt invisible, when her exhaustion meant she had nothing left to give. I'd cook dinner, sit at the table waiting, only to get a text that she'd be late again. Part of me understood. Another part of me ached. One Friday, after canceling plans for the 3rd time that month, I finally let out. "Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I know your job is demanding, but I can't keep feeling like I'm always last on your list." Her face fell. "I am sorry. I don't mean to make you feel that way." "I know," I sighed, "but it still hurts." We sat in silence, the weight of it between us. Then she reached across the table, taking my hand. "You're not last," she whispered. "You're the reason I can get through those days. Please don't ever doubt that." It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was real. And in relationships, sometimes that's enough. As months rolled on, our families intertwined more deeply. Holidays became shared affairs. Birthdays were celebrated together. And I found myself feeling like part of her family in ways I never expected. One Thanksgiving, Emily's father, still recovering but much stronger, pulled me aside after dinner. "You've done more for my daughter than I could ever repay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When she needed someone, you showed up. That's worth more than anything." Hearing that from a man who had almost slipped away from her life forever left me humbled. But the biggest test of our relationship came out of nowhere. Emily was offered promotion at work, a huge opportunity. The catch? It meant transferring to another city 2 hours away. When she told me, I felt the ground shift beneath me. "It's everything I've been working toward," she said, her eyes bright with possibility but clouded with worry. "But it would change everything for us." I swallowed hard. "Do you want to take it?" "Yes," she admitted softly, "but I don't want to lose you." We spent weeks wrestling with the decision. Long drives back and forth, late-night conversations filled with what-ifs. Finally, one evening as we sat in her apartment, surrounded by moving boxes, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I don't want the job if it means losing us," she said. "You're more important." I took her hands, heart pounding. "Emily, you've worked your whole life for this. We'll figure it out. If I have to drive 2 hours every weekend, I will. If we have to find a middle ground, we will. But I won't let distance be the reason we give up." Her tears spilled over, but she smiled through them. "You really mean that?" "Of course," I said. Love isn't about choosing the easy road. It's about choosing each other, even when the road is hard. So she took the job, and for the first 6 months, we lived between two cities, juggling schedules, late-night phone calls, and stolen weekends together. It wasn't easy, but somehow it brought us even closer. Every mile on the road was a reminder that she was worth it. Every bleary-eyed Monday morning after driving back from her place was proof that love sometimes asks for sacrifice and gives back tenfold. Eventually, we found a rhythm. Emily settled into her new role, and I found ways to work remotely so I could spend longer stretches of time with her. Our lives weren't perfectly aligned, but they were woven together in all the ways that mattered. And then one night, standing on the same porch swing where it all began, I knew what I had to do. I pulled a small box from my pocket, my hands shaking. "Emily," I said, my voice catching. That night, I stopped in the rain. I had no idea my whole life was about to change. But since then, every moment has proved to me that you're the one I want beside me through every storm. Will you marry me? Her hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." We laughed, we cried, and when I slipped the ring on her finger, it felt like everything had come full circle. Looking back, it still amazes me how a broken car on a stormy night turned into forever. Not because it was perfect, not because it was easy, but because when life handed us storms, we chose to face them together. And that choice, day after day, was what made it love. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more real stories like this with you. I never thought moving back to my hometown would change my life the way it did. I left when I was 19, desperate to escape the small town gossip, the endless stares whenever I walked into the diner, and the suffocating sense that everybody knew everything about me. I had dreams bigger than the brick streets and corner shops, so I packed 2 duffel bags and headed for the city. But 10 years later, here I was again, hauling those same bags, just a little more worn out and patched up, down Main Street. My life hadn't exactly turned out the way I imagined. The city didn't give me the glamorous life I thought it would. Instead, it gave me layoffs, a failed relationship that left me with nothing but debt, and a loneliness so heavy that sometimes it felt like another person sitting in my apartment with me. So, when my mom called saying my dad's health wasn't the best, and she could use some help at the family hardware store, I said yes. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't really have anywhere else to go. The bell above the shop door chimed when I stepped inside, and for a moment, I felt like I was 10 years old again, stocking shelves with my dad on a Saturday morning. The faint smell of lumber, dust, and old nails lingered in the air, a smell that somehow felt like home even though I'd run from it. "Welcome to Jensen's Hardware," a voice said from behind the counter. I froze. That wasn't my dad's voice. When I turned, I saw him, Ethan Hayes. Of all people, he was the last face I expected to see there. Ethan and I had history. Not romantic history, though sometimes I wondered if it could have been. He was my best friend in high school, the one person who made this town feel less suffocating. We were inseparable until senior year, when I announced I was leaving. He told me he'd never leave, that he belonged here, and we argued. I said he was throwing his life away, and he said I was running for mine. After that, we stopped talking. Now, standing in front of him a decade later, I wasn't sure whether to hug him or apologize. He raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter. "Well, if it isn't Miss City Girl herself. I thought you'd forgotten about us small-town folks." "Ethan," I said, my voice catching somewhere between surprise and awkwardness. "What are you doing here?" He grinned, and I hated how my chest tightened seeing it. "Running the store when your dad's not feeling up to it. Been helping out the last couple years." Of course he had. That was Ethan, loyal, dependable, the kind of guy who would never leave his roots. Meanwhile, I've been chasing dreams that turned to dust. For the next hour, we danced around each other. I stocked paint cans while he rang up customers, both of us pretending it wasn't strange to suddenly be in the same room again after 10 years. But the silence between us felt heavy, filled with words we never said back then. Later that night, after closing the shop, Ethan walked me out. The summer air was warm, crickets chirping in the background. He shoved his hands in his pockets like he used to in high school, a little smirk tugging at his lips. "You planning on sticking around this time?" he asked. I looked at the dim street lamps, the quiet of Main Street that felt both comforting and suffocating. "I don't know yet." "Well," he said softly, "it's good to see you again, Lena." That night, lying in my old bedroom, surrounded by posters I never took down, I couldn't stop thinking about him. About how time hadn't dulled his eyes or softened the way he made me feel seen. And deep down, I wondered if maybe coming back wasn't just about helping my parents. Maybe it was about unfinished business with Ethan. The days turned into weeks, and I settled back into the rhythm of small-town life. Helping customers find nails, fixing squeaky hinges, sharing coffee with my dad behind the counter. And almost every day, Ethan was there, his easy laugh filling the shop, his patience with every customer reminding me why people loved him. One afternoon, while we were restocking shelves together, he asked, "Do you ever regret leaving?" The question caught me off guard. Sometimes, I admit it, but I thought I needed more than this place. I thought if I stayed, I'd be stuck. He nodded slowly, sliding a box of screws onto the shelf. "And did you find what you were looking for?" The answer sat heavy in my chest. "Not really." He glanced at me then, and something in his eyes told me he understood more than I was saying. That night, he invited me to the town's summer festival, the one I hadn't been to since I left. The fairground lights glowed bright against the dark sky. Kids ran around with cotton candy, and the air smelled like fried dough. For the first time in years, I felt free. We walked past the carousel, and Ethan laughed at the way I still flinched when the Ferris wheel creaked. "You're still scared of heights, huh?" "Some things never change," I said, rolling my eyes. But when he bought 2 tickets and held one out to me, I couldn't say no. My heart pounded as we climbed into the rickety seat, the wheel jerking to life beneath us. Halfway up, I gripped the bar so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ethan chuckled and put his hand over mine. "Relax," he whispered. "I've got you." The world stretched out beneath us, twinkling lights and familiar rooftops. And sitting there with his hand covering mine, I realized maybe I wasn't so afraid of falling. Not if he was beside me. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between us. It wasn't just small talk or avoiding the past anymore. It was late nights on the porch talking about everything we never said. It was him bringing me coffee in the mornings, remembering I still took it with too much sugar. It was me laughing at his terrible jokes, even though I wanted to stay guarded. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, he said, "You know, when you left, I thought I hated you. But I think I just hated that you didn't see what you already had here." His words pierced me deeper than I expected, because maybe he was right. Maybe I'd been so busy chasing something bigger that I missed the person who mattered most. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to stop running. The days after Ethan's confession felt different. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the way he looked at me when he said them. It was like he was opening a door I thought had been locked years ago. And part of me wanted to run again, because opening that door meant facing what I'd lost and what I could lose all over again. But another part of me, a louder, braver part, wanted to step through. One morning, I found myself in the shop before opening hours. My dad was resting more these days, leaving me and Ethan to run most of the day today. I was rearranging a display of gardening tools when Ethan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one down next to me without saying a word, just like he'd done every day for the past couple weeks. "You're spoiling me," I teased, taking a sip. He grinned. "Or maybe I just like being the first person to make you smile every morning." I tried to laugh it off, but my cheeks warmed. He was getting bolder, and I wasn't sure my heart could handle much more of it. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Cartwright came in, struggling with her walker. She was in her 80s and lived alone down the street. She asked for help fixing a broken latch on her back gate, and before I could answer, Ethan volunteered us both. That evening, we walked to her house, toolbox in hand. I watched as Ethan knelt down, carefully adjusting the screws, making sure the latch closed smoothly. He explained what he was doing as if Mrs. Cartwright could learn to do it herself, even though we both knew she probably wouldn't. Still, the kindness in his voice made me ache. "You've always been like this," I said softly when we were done. "Like what?" "Helping everyone, no matter what." He shrugged. "It's what you're supposed to do. We look out for each other here." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how much I'd missed that sense of community. This city had taught me independence, but had also left me feeling alone. "Here." Ethan made sure no one felt that way. As we walked back, our hands brushed, just barely, but enough to send a jolt through me. Neither of us pulled away. A few nights later, the town hosted a charity fundraiser at the community center. It was one of those events where everyone brought a dish, raffles were sold, and the money went to fixing up the local park. I wasn't planning on going, but my mom insisted, so I put on a dress I hadn't worn in years and showed up. Ethan was there, of course, helping set up tables, carrying heavy boxes like it was nothing. He caught sight of me across the room and froze for a second before walking over. "You clean up nice," he said, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. I rolled my eyes, but my stomach flipped. "Don't sound so surprised." The evening was filled with laughter, kids running around, and the kind of warmth you can only find in a room full of neighbors who actually care about each other. When the raffle ended, a slow song started playing, and couples drifted to the center of the room. I stayed back, unsure, but Ethan appeared at my side. "Dance with me?" he asked. My first instinct was to say no, to keep my guard up, but the way he held out his hand, patient and steady, made me give in. As we swayed to the music, I realized how natural it felt to be in his arms. The years melted away, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. "You know," he murmured, "I used to imagine this. Us like this, back when we were kids." I leaned my head against his shoulder, my chest tightening. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because you were already halfway out the door," he admitted, "and I didn't want to hold you back." The honesty in his voice broke something in me. I had left because I thought I was meant for more, but maybe what I needed had been right here all along. The following week, disaster struck. A summer storm rolled in fast and hard, knocking down trees and flooding parts of town. The hardware store became a hub of activity. People coming in for supplies, sandbags, anything to protect their homes. Ethan and I barely stopped to breathe as we helped everyone who came through the doors. At one point, Mr. Thomas, an elderly man from the outskirts of town, came in soaked to the bone. His basement was flooding, and he didn't know what to do. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed a pump, tossed it in the truck, and told me to come with him. We spent hours bailing water, moving boxes, and salvaging what we could from Mr. Thomas's basement. By the time we finished, we were both drenched and exhausted, but Ethan still managed to crack a smile. "See," he said, brushing wet hair out of his face. "Helping people isn't so bad, is it?" I laughed, even though I was shivering. "I guess not." On the drive back, the rain slowed, and the silence between us grew heavy. Finally, Ethan said, "Lena, I don't want to push you, but I need to know, are you planning to stay? Because if you're going to leave again, I need to protect myself." The raw vulnerability in his voice nearly undid me. I'd spent so long running, so long convincing myself I needed something bigger, but in that moment, I realized what I wanted was right next to me. "I don't want to leave," I whispered. His hand found mine in the dark, squeezing gently. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hammers and voices outside. When I looked out the window, I saw Ethan leading a group of neighbors repairing the roof of a house damaged in the storm. Without thinking, I ran downstairs, pulled on my boots, and joined them. We spent the entire day working side by side, passing shingles, hauling tools, and laughing despite the sweat and exhaustion. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan and I sat on the porch, too tired to move. "You know," he said softly, "this feels right. You and me, working together, being here." I looked at him, my heart swelling. "Yeah, it does." And when he leaned in and kissed me, it wasn't fireworks or explosions. It was steady, certain, the kind of kiss that told me this wasn't the start of something fleeting. It was the beginning of something I'd been searching for all along. Over the weeks that followed, we grew closer. It wasn't just romance, it was partnership. We worked in the store together, helped neighbors together, laughed, and argued, and made up like two people who were finally willing to be honest. One night, sitting on the porch of my parents' house, I turned to him and said, "I think I finally get it. I spent so long looking for a bigger life, but maybe a bigger life isn't about where you go. Maybe it's about who you share it with." He smiled, that same smile that had been haunting me for years, and took my hand. "Then stay. Share it with me." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like running. I felt like staying. If you felt something in this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It means the world and helps me bring you more stories like this one. The first time I saw Rachel after all those years, it felt like time folded in on itself. I was standing in line at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, waiting to buy fresh bread, when I heard someone laugh behind me. That laugh, it was unmistakable. Light, easy, with that same little upward lilt she'd had when we were kids. I turned, and there she was, holding a basket full of apples, her hair tucked under a sun hat, looking like she belonged in some painting of a quiet country morning. "Evan," she asked, eyes widening as she recognized me. I froze, half a smile tugging at my lips. "Rachel, wow, it's been forever." We stood there in the middle of the crowd, staring at each other like ghosts. 10 years. 10 years since she'd left town with her family, chasing something bigger out in California. And now here she was, back in a place she swore she'd never return to. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said finally, shifting her basket in her hands. "I could say the same," I replied. "I thought you were building some empire on the West Coast." She gave a half smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Things change. Before I could ask, the line moved, and I had to turn back to pay for the bread. When I glanced around again, she was gone. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she'd looked at me, like she had 1,000 things to say but didn't know where to start. Rachel and I had been inseparable growing up. We'd built forts in the woods, biked through the dusty back roads, spent summers at the lake catching fireflies. She'd been my best friend, my first crush, the person I thought would always be there. And then, one day, she was gone. Her family left suddenly, and all I got was a short goodbye letter she'd stuffed in my mailbox the night before. I'd read it 100 times, memorized every word, but it still hadn't explained why she couldn't stay in touch. For years, I wondered if I'd done something wrong. The following week, I saw her again. This time, in a hardware store where I worked. She was standing in the aisle staring at a row of paint samples like they were written in another language. "Need help picking a shade of white?" I asked, coming up behind her. She startled, then laughed when she saw me. "Evan, God, you scared me. Saw the..." Didn't mean to sneak up. She held up 2 paint chips. "Tell me honestly, do these look exactly the same? Or am I losing my mind?" I grinned. "One's more eggshell, the other's cream. Totally different." She rolled her eyes. "Of course. I forgot you were the local expert on hardware and home repairs. Hey, don't knock it. This place keeps me fed." She hesitated, then said, "I just moved back into my parents' old house. Thought I'd fix it up." That explained the paint, but it didn't explain why she was back after all this time. "You came back for good?" I asked carefully. She bit her lip, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she sighed. "Yeah, for good. California wasn't what I thought it would be." Her voice was softer now, almost tired. I wanted to ask more, but she changed the subject quickly, pointing to a paintbrush and asking if it was any good. We ended up talking for nearly an hour. By the time she left, arms full of supplies, she promised she'd call if she needed help with repairs. I knew she wouldn't call. Rachel had always been stubborn that way. A few days later, she did. "Hey," she said over the phone, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "Do you know how to fix a leaky sink?" I laughed. "I know how to fix a lot of things." "Which means you're admitting defeat. Just get over here before I flood the kitchen." When I arrived, she was standing in the middle of the kitchen with a towel pressed to the cabinet under the sink. Water was dripping steadily onto the floor. "All right, step aside," I said, grabbing the toolbox I brought. She hovered nearby as I worked, handing me wrenches and shining a flashlight like an eager apprentice. It reminded me of when we were kids, and I tried to fix my bike while she supervised, offering completely useless advice. "There," I said after about 20 minutes, tightening the last pipe. "Good as new." She let out a sigh of relief, then grinned at me. I owe you one. Dinner, I said before I could stop myself. You can pay me back with dinner. Her eyebrows shot up. Smooth, Evan. Real smooth. I shrugged, trying to play it off. Just saying, a man can't live on hardware store wages alone. She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made the years between us vanish. That weekend, we had dinner together. Nothing fancy, just pasta at her place, with music playing softly in the background. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. About the town, about people we used to know, about what we'd been doing all this time. But when I asked about California, her smile faltered. It wasn't what I thought, she said quietly. I thought moving there would mean freedom, success, adventure, and maybe for a while it did. But it was lonely, hard, and when things fell apart, her voice trailed off. I didn't push. Instead, I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She didn't pull away. For the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was back not just for the town, but for me too. The weeks that followed felt like stepping back into an old rhythm, but with something new layered in. Rachel and I started spending more time together, painting her living room, fixing creaky doors, walking around the lake like we used to. Every time she smiled at me, I felt the weight of the past 10 years slowly lifting. But there was something else there too, a shadow. I could see it in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, hear it in her voice when she went quiet. Something had happened in California, something she wasn't telling me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it might be the one thing standing between us. For days after that dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow in Rachel's eyes. She laughed with me, teased me like old times, worked beside me like nothing had changed, but every so often there was a flicker of something deeper, something broken, that she tried to hide. I wanted to know what it was, but I also didn't want to push her away. After 10 years apart, I wasn't about to ruin the fragile bridge we were rebuilding. One Saturday morning, she called and asked if I'd help her clean out the attic of her parents' old house. I said yes before she even finished the question. When I showed up, she was already covered in dust, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked ridiculous and beautiful. Ready to face the ghosts? She asked, holding up a cardboard box full of old photo albums. Only if you promise not to judge me for my terrible haircut in middle school. I shot back. We spent hours up there, sorting through boxes, laughing at old pictures, finding relics from our childhoods, half-broken toys, school projects, forgotten letters. At one point, Rachel pulled out a shoebox and froze. Her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then set it aside. Nothing important, but I could see the way her hands trembled, the way her voice cracked just a little. Later, when we carried everything down, she left that box behind. And though part of me wanted to ask about it, I didn't. Not yet. A week later, I got my answer. I was closing up the hardware store when Rachel walked in, eyes red from crying. She didn't say anything, just stood there in the doorway like she didn't know where else to go. I dropped everything and went to her. "Rachel, what happened?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I made a mess of things, Evan." I guided her to a chair, handed her some water, and waited. Slowly, haltingly, she told me the truth. In California, she'd fallen in love with someone. At first, it had been everything she dreamed of, fast, exciting, full of promise. But over time, it turned toxic, controlling. He chipped away at her confidence, at her friendships, until she barely recognized herself. By the time she found the courage to leave, she had nothing left. No job, no savings, no plan. "That's why I came back," she whispered, staring at her hands. "Because this is the only place that still feels safe. The only place that still feels like home." My chest ached for her. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. "You're safe here, with me, always." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. From then on, things changed between us. Not in a bad way. If anything, it made us closer. Rachel let me see the cracks, the hurt she'd been hiding. And I let her lean on me, the way she'd once been my anchor when we were kids. We weren't just rebuilding her parents' house anymore. We were rebuilding her. One evening, while we were painting her bedroom, she set down her roller and looked at me. "Why are you doing all this for me?" I raised an eyebrow. because your taste in paint colors is terrible. She smacked my arm, laughing, but then her expression softened. No, seriously. Why? I put down my roller too. Because you were always there for me, Rachel. When my mom got sick, when I felt like the world was falling apart. You were the one who made it bearable. I never forgot that, and I don't plan on letting you face anything alone now. She stared at me for a long moment, then whispered, "You really haven't changed, have you?" "Maybe a little taller," I teased. And then, before I knew what was happening, she leaned in and kissed me. It was soft, hesitant at first, like she was testing the waters. But then I kissed her back, and all the years between us dissolved. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. "I shouldn't," she murmured, guilt flickering in her eyes. "Yes, you should," I said firmly, "because I've been waiting 10 years for that." The weeks after that felt like something out of a dream. We fell into a rhythm, working on the house during the day, sharing dinners at night, sneaking kisses whenever we thought no one was looking. The town buzzed with gossip, of course, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt whole. One night, we sat on her porch watching the stars. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left?" she asked quietly. "All the time," I admitted, "but maybe we had to take the long way around to get here." She smiled at that, and I kissed the top of her head. But the past has a way of catching up. One afternoon, as we were fixing the fence in her backyard, a car pulled up in front of the house. A sleek, black car that didn't belong in our small town. Rachel went pale. "Who is that?" I asked, but she didn't answer. A man stepped out, tall, sharp suit, the kind of arrogance you can spot a mile away. He walked straight up to Rachel. "Rachel," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." My stomach dropped. This was him, the man she told me about. Her voice shook. "You shouldn't be here. I can't take you back," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You know you don't belong here." Before Rachel could respond, I stepped between them. She said no. The man's eyes flicked to me, full of disdain. "And who the hell are you?" "The person who's not letting you hurt her again," I said, my fists clenched. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Evan, please. Don't." But I couldn't just stand there. "Leave," I told him. My voice was steady, even though my heart was pounding. "She doesn't want you here. If you care about her at all, you'll respect that." For a long, tense moment, I thought he'd try something. But then he smirked, shook his head, and got back in his car. "I'll be back," he said before driving away. Rachel collapsed against me, shaking. I held her until she calmed down. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You don't need to apologize," I said. "You just need to trust that I've got your back. Always." That night, she broke down completely. Told me every detail of what he'd done, how he'd manipulated her, how he made her believe she wasn't worth more. I held her through it, promising her she was more than enough, that she always had been. And somewhere in the middle of her tears, she looked up at me and said, "I love you, Evan." The words hit me like a tidal wave. "I love you too," I whispered. "Always have." From that moment on, we stopped pretending. Rachel wasn't just my childhood best friend anymore. She was my partner, my love, my future. Together, we rebuilt not just her parents' house, but her life. In the process, I realized she'd rebuilt mine too. If this story touched you, hit like and subscribe. It keeps me going and helps me bring more real stories your way. I never thought a random act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday morning would end up changing the direction of my entire life. But looking back now, every single thing that happened that day feels like it was meant to line up just right, like the universe nudged me in the right direction. It was early spring in New York, the kind of day when the sky is heavy, gray, and looks like it's about to dump buckets of rain at any moment. I had stayed up too late working the night before, bleary-eyed from answering emails and pushing through edits on a project that my boss said was urgent. I hated that word. It felt like everything in my office was urgent, and yet none of it ever seemed to matter 6 months later. Anyway, that morning I overslept. By the time I rushed out the door, my umbrella was nowhere to be found. My hair was damp by the time I got to the subway, and my shoes were already soaked. I remember muttering under my breath as I shoved my Metro card into the machine, thinking, great, another day where I just try to survive until bedtime. The train platform was crowded. People huddled close together to avoid getting wet. But then I noticed her. She was sitting on the wooden bench near the far end, with a giant cardboard box balanced awkwardly on her lap. Her coat was soaked through, hair plastered to her face, but she had this determined expression like she was willing herself not to cry. Something about her made me pause. I don't usually approach strangers. New Yorkers aren't exactly known for small talk, but I couldn't help it. "You okay there?" I asked, nodding toward the box. She blinked, startled. "Oh yeah, it's just heavy." Her voice cracked a little, and before she could stop herself, she laughed awkwardly like she didn't want to admit she was struggling. "You carrying bricks in there or what?" I said with a smile. That made her smile, too, even if it was faint. "Not bricks. Books." She tilted the box just slightly, and sure enough, it was packed full of thick novels and hardcovers. Some looked brand new, others well-worn. "Ah, the dangerous kind of bricks," I said. "The ones that make you stay up all night." She laughed again, but this time it was genuine. "Exactly." The train screeched to a halt then, and she tried to stand with the box. I watched her struggle for a second before stepping forward. "Here," I said, holding out my arms. "Let me help you." She hesitated, like she didn't want to inconvenience me. But when she finally let me take one side, the box nearly tipped because of how heavy it was. We steadied it together, both laughing at how ridiculous it looked, trying to shove our way onto a crowded subway car with what was basically a mini library in our hands. By some miracle, 2 seats opened up next to each other, and we collapsed into them with the box balanced across our laps. "You're a lifesaver," she said, brushing damp hair out of her face. "I seriously don't think I could have carried this another block." "No problem. But you gotta tell me, why are you hauling around 100 pounds of books in the middle of a storm?" She let out a sigh, one of those long ones that says there's a story here. "My mom passed away last year," she said quietly. "These were hers. I just moved out of our old apartment. I couldn't leave them behind. She loved her books more than anything." I went still. I didn't expect her to be so open with me, a complete stranger. But something about the way she said it, soft, vulnerable, like she didn't share this with many people, it pulled me in. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. She nodded, her eyes shining, but she quickly forced a smile. "It's okay. It feels like keeping them close keeps her close, you know?" I didn't know what to say, but I understood. More than she realized. My dad had passed away 3 years earlier, and I still kept his old leather jacket hanging in my closet, even though it didn't fit me. It smelled faintly like him still, and every time I thought about getting rid of it, I couldn't. We rode the train in silence for a bit after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where you feel like you're sharing something unspoken with someone. When we reached her stop, I helped her carry the box off the train. She turned to me on the platform, her face a little brighter now despite the rain. "Thanks again," she said. "Really, I don't even know your name, but you made today less terrible." "Jake," I said, holding out my hand awkwardly. She balanced the box on her hip and shook it. "Sophie." I don't know what made me say it next. Maybe it was the rain, maybe it was the way her smile tugged at something in me, or maybe I was just tired of feeling like every day was the same. "Hey, Sophie, would you maybe want some help getting the rest of your stuff moved? How about the whole weekend free?" She looked at me for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if I was a creep or not. Then, slowly she smiled. "You know what? Yeah, that would actually be amazing." And just like that, what started as a miserable Tuesday turned into the beginning of something I couldn't have imagined. That weekend, I showed up at her new apartment, a small but cozy walk-up with boxes stacked everywhere. We spent hours unpacking, organizing, and setting up bookshelves together. Every time she pulled a book out of the box, she would tell me a story about how her mom had loved it, or a memory of the two of them reading late at night. Somewhere between carrying boxes, laughing over crooked IKEA furniture, and ordering greasy takeout, I realized I didn't want the day to end. And judging by the way Sophie leaned against me while we watched her new place slowly come together, I don't think she wanted it to end either. But the thing about life is it rarely gives you something this good without testing you first. And over the weeks that followed, we learned just how much two people can hold each other up when the world feels too heavy. The days after that weekend moved in a blur. I went back to my normal job, my normal commute, my normal coffee runs, but everything felt slightly different. Like the colors around me were brighter, like I had this extra hum of energy in my chest. Sophie and I started texting, at first just small things. She'd send me a picture of a book she'd just unpacked, saying, "This was Mom's favorite. Have you read it?" I'd send back a photo of my cluttered desk at work, joking about how I needed someone like her to come and organize my disaster of space. But soon, the texts weren't just about books or small talk. They were about everything. Long, rambling messages late at night, when the city had quieted and both of us felt safe enough to share the thoughts we usually kept to ourselves. I told her about my dad, about how I kept his leather jacket, even though I couldn't bring myself to wear it. She told me about how her mom would read aloud to her when she was little, even when Sophie could read perfectly fine on her own. Those conversations built something between us, a bridge. And before I realized it, she had become the person I wanted to talk to first thing in the morning and the last person I wanted to say good night to before I went to bed. One night, about 3 weeks after helping her move, she texted, "You want to come over for dinner? I can't promise it'll be good, but I'll try not to burn the kitchen down." I didn't even hesitate. What time? Her apartment had transformed since the first day I helped her carry in boxes. Now it felt lived in. Pictures on the walls, candles flickering on the counter, the faint smell of pasta sauce in the air. "You cook?" I asked as I stepped in, shaking the rain off my jacket. She wrinkled her nose. Cook is a strong word. More like attempt to feed myself without poisoning anyone. I laughed, slipping into the kitchen to see the pot bubbling on the stove. She had flowers smudged on her cheek, and the sight made me smile in a way I hadn't in years. "Smells good," I said honestly. She grinned. "You just saying that so you don't hurt my feelings." "Maybe," I teased. Dinner was chaotic, messy, and perfect. The pasta stuck together, the garlic bread was slightly burnt, and she spilled sauce on the table, but none of it mattered. We sat across from each other with glasses of wine, laughing harder than I had in months. Halfway through, she grew quiet. Her fork rested on her plate, and she just looked at me. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. She shook her head softly. It's been a long time since I felt like this. Like I can breathe. Like I'm not drowning in everything I lost." Her words hit me deep because I felt the same. "I get it," I said quietly. "It's been a long time for me, too." For a moment, the air between us was heavy, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me aware of every beat of my heart. And then she smiled. "You're making me sentimental. Eat your pasta." We both laughed, the tension breaking, but something had shifted. Over the next few months, Sophie and I became inseparable. Some nights we'd stay up late in her apartment, curled up on the couch surrounded by her mom's books. Other nights we'd walk through the city just to talk, stopping for coffee or ice cream even when it was freezing outside. She had this way of making everything feel lighter. The job I hated felt less crushing because I had someone to vent to. The grief I carried from losing my dad felt less suffocating when I could share it with her. One afternoon, we were walking through Central Park when she stopped suddenly. She pointed to a bench with a small plaque on it. "Look," she said softly. "It says, 'From Margaret, who taught me how to dream.'" That was my mom's name. I glanced at her, seeing the way her eyes shimmered. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. We stood there together, reading the words over and over, and I realized that in that moment, I didn't just care about her. I needed her. But life, as always, has a way of testing you. A few weeks later, Sophie's job dropped a bomb on her. She worked as a freelance editor, piecing together contracts wherever she could, but one of her biggest clients suddenly pulled out. She panicked, worrying about rent, bills, everything. When she called me that night, her voice was shaky. "I don't know how I'm going to make it through the next couple months. I don't want to lose this apartment, Jake. It's the last thing I have of her." My chest ached hearing her like that. I wanted to fix it to take the weight off her shoulders, but I knew she hated the idea of being pitted. So instead, I said, "Okay, we'll figure it out. Together." And we did. I started picking up extra hours at work, and whenever I could, I'd slip her grocery money or cover the utilities without making it obvious. We started selling some of the duplicate books she had in her collection, laughing as we argued over which ones were safe to part with. Through it all, I saw a different side of Sophie. Strong, stubborn, but also vulnerable in a way she rarely let anyone see. And it only made me fall for her harder. One night, months later, we were sitting on our fire escape, watching the city lights twinkle below. She rested her head on my shoulder, and the quiet felt safe. "You know what's crazy?" she said softly. "What?" "That I met you on a train. Like, what are the odds? One bad morning, one heavy box of books, and suddenly I'm here with you." I smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Best bad morning of my life. She laughed, but then she grew serious. She turned to look at me, her eyes reflecting the glow of the city. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Jake," she whispered. "I really don't." I swallowed hard, because I knew the truth. I didn't know what I would have done without her either. And right there, in the middle of a noisy city, sitting on a rusted fire escape with a girl who carried her mother's books like they were sacred, I realized something. I wasn't just falling for Sophie. I was already gone. The future was uncertain. We didn't know what challenges would come next, or how long the good moments would last. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of what came next. Because whatever it was, I knew we'd face it together. If you felt something while listening to Sophie and Jake's story, make sure to like this video and hit subscribe. It helps us share more stories like this with you. I didn't expect a flat tire to change the course of my life. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or stay clear. I was driving home from work, already tired, when I felt the thump, thump, thump under my car. I pulled over, cursing under my breath, and realized my back tire was shredded. Now, I'm not completely useless. I can change a tire, but of course the spare in my trunk was also flat. Typical. I sat on the curb with my head in my hands, wondering how long I'd be waiting for roadside assistance. That's when a voice broke through my frustration. "Need some help?" I looked up, and there she was. A woman in jeans and a paint-stained sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a set of keys in the other. She had the kind of smile that made you pause, the kind that said she'd been through rough days but still chose to be kind. Yeah, I admitted. "Unless you've got a spare tire lying around." She laughed, and I swear the sound made the whole situation less awful. "Not exactly, but I've got an air compressor in my trunk. Might be enough to get you to a shop." I blinked. Who just carries around an air compressor? Before I could even process it, she was setting her groceries down and hauling the thing out of her car. She knelt beside my useless tire like she'd done it 100 times before. "You do this a lot?" I asked. She shrugged. "My dad runs a mechanic shop. Growing up, I wasn't allowed to leave the house unless I could change a tire and jumpstart car. His rules." "Smart man," I said, watching her work. Within minutes, the tire had just enough air to limp down the road. She stood up, brushing her hands on her jeans, and flashed that smile again. "There, you're good for now, but you should probably hit Pete's Auto on Main. They won't rip you off." "Thanks," I said, still a little stunned. "I'm Jake, by the way." "Samantha," she replied, grabbing her groceries. "Sam, if you don't want to sound like my high school principal." That should have been the end of it. A random act of kindness, a stranger helping another stranger on a bad day. But life had other plans. When I pulled into Pete's Auto later that night, guess who was standing behind the counter, joking with the mechanic? "Yep, Sam. Small world," I muttered as I walked in. She grinned. "Told you they wouldn't rip you off. Pete's practically my uncle. He'll have you set up by morning." Sure enough, she was right. Pete gave me a fair deal, and while the paperwork was being sorted, Sam sat with me in the waiting area. "You live around here?" I asked. "Yeah, just a couple blocks over," she said. "Work at the art center on 5th. I teach kids classes, hence the paint stains." "That explains it," I said, nodding toward her sweatshirt. "I thought maybe you were secretly a graffiti artist." She laughed. I'll neither confirm nor deny. It was easy talking to her. Too easy. We traded stories about terrible jobs, weird neighbors, and embarrassing moments. By the time Pete handed me my keys back, I realized I didn't want the conversation to end. "You hungry?" I asked, surprising myself. Sam tilted her head, studying me for a moment. Then she smiled. "Starving." We ended up at a little diner down the street. The kind of place with sticky menus and bottomless coffee that tasted like burnt toast, but somehow it was perfect. She ordered pancakes at 8 p.m. I ordered a burger. And somewhere between laughing about her students finger painting her shoes and her teasing me about my serious coffee addiction, something clicked. It wasn't just attraction, it was connection. And the weirdest part? It felt like I'd known her forever. Over the next few weeks, I kept finding excuses to see her. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, running into her at the grocery store, grabbing coffee near her art center. But the truth was, I was looking for her. And more often than not, she was looking for me too. One Saturday, she invited me to help out at the art center. "Don't worry, you won't have to paint," she said. "Unless you want to." Turns out, the art center wasn't just classes. It doubled as a community space for kids who didn't have much else. Some of them came from rough backgrounds, others just needed a safe place to go after school. Watching Sam with them was something else. She had this way of making every kid feel seen, important. She laughed with them, encouraged them, and when one boy got frustrated and tried to storm out, she knelt down and talked to him until he came back inside. Later, I asked her, "How do you do that? How do you stay so patient?" She shrugged, wiping paint off her hands. "Because I was that kid once, and someone was patient with me." That stuck with me. Our relationship grew in little ways. Coffee runs, late-night drives, helping her haul canvases into the studio. But the moment I knew it was something more was the night her car broke down. Not the tire this time. Her old beat-up sedan just wouldn't start. I drove over with jumper cables, ready to play the hero, but when I saw her sitting on the curb with her head in her hands, it wasn't about fixing the car. She looked up at me, her eyes tired. "I can't afford another repair right now. Rent, bills, the art center, it's too much." Without thinking, I sat beside her. "We'll figure it out. Together." Her eyes softened, and she leaned into me. "You really mean that?" "Of course I do," I said. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." That was the night we crossed from friends into something more. It wasn't dramatic, no fireworks or slow-motion movie kiss. It was quiet, sitting on a curb under a broken streetlight, holding each other like the world wasn't as heavy when we weren't alone. And honestly, that meant more than anything else ever could. But just like before, life wasn't about to let things stay easy. A few weeks later, the art center got word that their funding was being cut. Without it, they couldn't keep the doors open. Sam tried to hide how much it crushed her, but I could see it every time she walked into that paint-stained classroom. "This place saved me," she told me one night. "I can't let it close." Her voice cracked, and I realized just how much it meant to her. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her fight alone. "Then we won't," I said. "We'll find a way." And that's where everything really began to change. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my room, catching on the notes and flowers Ethan had left behind. I smiled before I even opened my eyes fully, remembering the look on his face the night before when he told me he wasn't afraid of how people might talk anymore. It was a turning point, one of those quiet but powerful moments that shift the entire course of something fragile into something unshakable. I stretched and reached for my phone, wondering if he'd texted me already, and of course he had. A simple message. "Coffee at 9? My treat. Don't say no." I grinned. When I met him, he was already sitting outside the cafe, hair still damp from a shower, sleeves rolled up, and a nervous smile that seemed to melt away as soon as our eyes met. He stood up when he saw me, pulling out the chair for me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I ordered your usual," he said. "I hope that's not too assuming." "Actually, that's exactly right." I laughed, touched that he had remembered such a small detail. The conversation flowed, easy and comfortable, weaving between light teasing and deeper confessions. He told me about the pressures he'd been under to follow a path that wasn't his, how exhausting it was to live for others instead of himself. I told him about my own struggles, about always feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was being measured against invisible expectations I could never quite meet. Somewhere in the middle of sharing all this, he reached across the table and took my hand. Not casually, not halfway, but fully, his fingers interlocking with mine like he was making a silent promise. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't just infatuation. This was someone choosing me, not just for the good moments, but for the parts of me I was used to hiding. The days turned into weeks, and soon Ethan wasn't just a part of my afternoons. He was woven into every part of my life. He walked me home, carried my groceries when I was too stubborn to ask for help, and called me late at night just to hear my voice before he fell asleep. But the part that changed everything came one rainy evening. I had gotten caught in a storm, completely drenched, shivering as I struggled to unlock my apartment door. Out of nowhere, Ethan appeared, umbrella in hand, jacket draped over his arm. He didn't say anything, just wrapped the jacket around me and pulled me into a hug so tight that for the first time in forever, I didn't feel cold anymore. "You don't have to go through anything alone anymore," he whispered into my hair. I believed him. From that night on, I noticed the little ways he kept proving it true. When I was stressed at work, he left notes in my lunch. When I was too tired to cook, he showed up with takeout and my favorite movie queued up. And when I doubted myself, he reminded me of every single reason he saw me as strong, capable, and worth loving. But it wasn't just about what he did for me. The beauty was in what we did for each other. I learned how much he needed someone to listen when he was overwhelmed. I learned how much it meant to him when I showed up at his soccer matches, even though I barely understood the rules. I learned that helping someone heal doesn't always come in grand gestures. It's in the everyday ways you remind them they're not alone. One Saturday, we volunteered at a local shelter together. Watching him kneel down to talk to the kids, listening patiently to their stories, playing games with them like they were the only people who mattered in the world, it made me fall for him all over again. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't pretend to be. He was simply good, and that goodness radiated into everything he touched. Later that night, as we walked home, he suddenly stopped under a streetlight, raindrops from an earlier drizzle still clinging to his hair. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think love was this complicated thing you had to chase and fight for. But with you, it just exists. It feels easy, even when life isn't." My heart ached in the best way possible. "That's because it's real," I whispered. The moment felt like something out of a movie, but the difference was, it was ours, and that made it infinitely more beautiful. Weeks turned into months, and soon our relationship wasn't just a series of stolen glances and late-night confessions. It was building routines together, supporting each other's dreams, and facing challenges as a team. We weren't perfect. There were disagreements, insecurities, and moments of doubt. But every time, we chose to fight for each other instead of against each other. The real test came when Ethan got an opportunity to work abroad for 3 months. It was the kind of chance that could change his career, but it also meant distance, uncertainty, and the possibility of strain. I'll never forget the night he told me. He was pacing, clearly torn, worried about what it would mean for us. "I don't want to lose you," he admitted. "I've never had something this real before, and I don't want distance to ruin it." I took his hand, steadying him. "If it's real, distance won't ruin it. We'll get through it together." And we did. Every phone call, every message, every video chat kept us connected. There were hard nights, but there was also the deep comfort of knowing that the foundation we'd built was strong enough to weather anything. When he finally came back, the airport reunion wasn't filled with grand speeches. It was filled with relief, laughter, and the kind of hug you never want to let go of. Standing there, wrapped up in him, I realized something. Love isn't just about the magical beginnings or the cinematic moments under streetlights. It's about showing up every single day in ways big and small. It's about carrying each other through storms, reminding each other of your worth, and never letting go even when it's hard. And with Ethan, I had all of that. If this story warmed your heart, give it a like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because sometimes the smallest click can be the start of another beautiful connection. The first time I saw her was in the middle of the chaos that was my sister's engagement party. The living room was full of relatives catching up, kids running around with plates of food, and the kind of loud laughter that only happens when family crams into one space. I was balancing 2 trays of samosas and juice glasses, trying not to spill, when I caught sight of a girl sitting quietly in the corner near the bookshelf. She wasn't talking to anyone, just flipping through one of the photo albums my mom had left out. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and the small smile on her face seemed almost private, like the pictures in the album were telling her a story only she could hear. I had no idea who she was, but something about her presence pulled at me in a way I couldn't explain. "Hey, you okay over there?" I asked as I set the trays down. She looked up, startled for a second before smiling. "Oh, I'm fine. Sorry, I shouldn't be snooping." She closed the album quickly, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "You're not snooping," I assured her. "That album's been here for years. Honestly, I don't think anyone's touched it in a decade. I'm Alex, by the way, brother of the bride." Her expression softened. "I'm Maya, cousin of, well, technically cousin of the groom. Distant cousin. We've never met before, I guess." And just like that, we had a reason to keep talking. The noise around us faded as we started comparing stories about our families, laughing at the weird similarities. She told me about how she'd grown up in a quieter town, but loved being around big, messy families because it made her feel like she belonged to something bigger. I confessed that while I love my family, sometimes it all felt overwhelming, like I was constantly trying to be everywhere at once just to keep the peace. By the time my mom called me into the kitchen to help with the food, I didn't want to leave. And when I came back out, I noticed Maya had migrated from the corner to the dining table, helping my little cousin with a jigsaw puzzle. She wasn't just beautiful, she was warm, gentle, and effortlessly kind. That night, after everyone left, I found myself thinking about her more than I probably should have. Over the next few weeks, our families got together often to plan for the wedding, which meant I got to see Maya again. At first, it was just small conversations, sharing snacks in the kitchen, teasing each other about the chaos of family gatherings. But then the conversations grew deeper. One evening, when the rest of the house was buzzing with relatives arguing about wedding decorations, we found ourselves on the balcony, watching the sunset. "You know what I love about this?" she said softly. "What?" "That even with all the noise, all the stress, there's still these little moments where everything feels still, where it's just peaceful." I glanced at her, the fading sunlight reflecting in her eyes. "Yeah, I get what you mean." She turned to me, smiling. "I like that you get it. Not everyone does." It was such a simple exchange, but it felt like the start of something I couldn't name. As the wedding preparations intensified, so did the time we spent together. Sometimes we teamed up to run errands, picking up decorations, taste testing food samples, or helping set up tables. Other times, we just slipped away from the noise, stealing quiet conversations in corners no one paid attention to. One day, we were tasked with delivering invitation cards to a relative's house. On the way back, it started to rain unexpectedly. We ran for cover, laughing like kids, and ended up ducking into a small cafe nearby. Sitting across from her with rain streaking down the windows, I realized I didn't just like talking to her. I needed it. You ever feel like some people just understand you faster than others? I asked, staring at the foam on my coffee. "All the time," she replied. Then, after a pause, she added, "That's how it feels with you." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just infatuation anymore. There was a sense of connection, of trust, that built itself every time we spoke. Of course, in families as big and opinionated as ours, nothing stays hidden for long. My sister teased me one evening when she caught me looking across the room at Maya. "You like her?" she whispered, grinning. I rolled my eyes. "Don't start. I'm serious. I've never seen you this invested in anyone at these things before. Just be careful, okay? Families can get complicated." She wasn't wrong. Families always had opinions, especially when romance and distant cousins got thrown into the mix. But I couldn't help the way I felt, and I wasn't about to let fear decide for me. As the wedding day drew closer, so did we. She began to feel less like a guest, and more like someone who belonged to my everyday life. But I didn't know what she felt, at least not for sure. That uncertainty gnawed at me, especially the night before the wedding when everyone was gathered in the backyard stringing lights. Maya and I ended up alone again, this time untangling a stubborn knot of fairy lights. "Of course it's us stuck with this job," I joked, pulling uselessly at the wires. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she said, her tone softer than usual. I froze for a second, looking at her. The air between us felt charged, like something important was about to happen. But before I could say anything, my uncle shouted from across the yard, breaking the moment. Maya laughed nervously, and we went back to untangling, the words unspoken lingering in the air. That night, I lay awake wondering what would have happened if we hadn't been interrupted, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, Maya felt the same way I did. The wedding day arrived in a rush of noise, color, and nerves. From the moment I opened my eyes, the house was alive with the smell of food cooking, relatives calling for each other, and kids running around in their new clothes. I was pulled in every direction, helping set up tables outside, carrying decorations, making last-minute phone calls. But even through the chaos, my eyes kept searching for Maya. I found her mid-morning in the kitchen, carefully arranging sweets onto a platter. Her hair was tied back, her dress a soft pastel that somehow made her stand out in the blur of bright outfits around her. She noticed me hovering by the door and smiled. "Big day for your sister," she said warmly. "Yeah, feels like the whole world is here," I joked, stepping in to help her with the plates. Her hands brushed mine as she passed me a tray. It was such a small thing, but it sent a wave through me that I couldn't ignore anymore. Throughout the day, we kept bumping into each other. On purpose, I think. During the ceremony, I caught her looking at me when she thought no one noticed. At the reception, when the music was too loud and everyone was dancing, we ended up standing near the edge of the crowd, shoulders close, voices low. "You look like you want to be anywhere but here," Maya teased, sipping her juice. "I could think of one place I'd rather be," I said, surprising myself. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? Where?" I hesitated, then smiled. "Wherever you are." She didn't respond right away, but the way her lips curved and her eyes softened was enough. Later that evening, when the families finally started to disperse and the noise gave way to exhaustion, I found her again. She was sitting on the front steps of the house, shoes off, rubbing her feet. "Long day?" I asked, sitting beside her. "The longest," she laughed. Then, quieter, "but one of the best." The streetlights cast a warm glow, and for a moment, it was just us. No noise, no families, no interruptions. I took a breath. "Maya, I don't know if this is too fast, or if it's even smart with all the family connections, but I really like you. More than I've liked anyone in a long time." Her expression shifted, a mixture of surprise and something gentler. "Alex," I braced myself, unsure of what she'd say. But then she smiled, soft, genuine. "I like you too. I've been trying not to because of all the family complications, but it's hard to fight when it feels this easy with you." The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. I laughed, shaking my head. "You have no idea how long I've been trying to figure out if I was imagining this." "You weren't," she said simply. We sat in silence for a while, just letting the moment sink in. I didn't need fireworks or grand declarations. That quiet honesty between us was enough. The weeks after the wedding gave us time to explore what that moment meant. We didn't rush. At first, it was just more texts, more phone calls, little excuses to meet up for coffee or run errands together. Each time we talked, I discovered something new about her. Her love of old movies, her habit of humming when she cooked, the way she always stopped to pet stray cats on the street. It wasn't just that I liked her. It was that being around her made me want to be better. More patient, more present, more open. One evening, she invited me over to her parents' place. I was nervous, expecting awkward introductions, but her mom greeted me like she'd known me forever, and her dad shook my hand with an approving nod. It felt natural, like I wasn't intruding, but instead stepping into something I was meant to be part of. After dinner, Maya and I went for a walk around her neighborhood. The night was cool, the street quiet except for the sound of our footsteps. "Can I tell you something?" she asked suddenly. "Of course. I wasn't sure about coming here for the wedding. I almost didn't, but now I can't imagine not coming. If I hadn't, we wouldn't be here." I stopped walking and looked at her. "You really think so?" She nodded. "Yeah, I think some things happen for a reason." That moment, under the streetlights, I wanted to tell her everything. How she made me feel like the noise of the world faded. How I couldn't imagine my days without her laughter. But I kept it simple. "I'm glad you came," I said, my voice steady. and she smiled in that way that made me feel like the world had just clicked into place. Months passed, and what started as quiet conversations at a wedding turned into something deeper. We weren't just falling in love. We were learning each other, supporting each other through everyday challenges. When work stressed me out, she was the calm voice on the other end of the phone. When she doubted herself, I was the one reminding her of her strength. One evening, as we sat on our balcony, watching the sunset the way we used to during the wedding preparations, I reached for her hand. "Remember when you said you loved those little peaceful moments?" I asked. She nodded, leaning her head against my shoulder. "This is one of them," I said quietly. She smiled without looking up. "It is." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel restless or overwhelmed. I just felt home. If you've been here with us through this story, it means a lot. If you'd like more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me share more moments just like these. I never thought a broken down car on a rainy night would change the course of my life. I was 26, exhausted from work, driving home on a road I'd taken 100 times before. But that night, my old sedan gave up on me. It sputtered, jerked, and finally coasted to a stop right on the shoulder, rain hammering down like it had been waiting for me to get stranded. I cursed under my breath, pulled my hood over my head, and stepped out into the storm, trying to figure out if I could jump it or push it far enough to a safer spot. Cars whizzed past, their headlights flashing through sheets of rain, but nobody slowed down. I don't blame them. If I saw a stranger on the side of the road in weather like that, I'm not sure I'd stop either. But someone did. A silver SUV slowed, hazard lights flickering, and pulled up behind me. I froze for a second, half relieved and half cautious. Then the driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman about my age, holding an umbrella. She walked toward me with confidence, like she had done this a dozen times. "Need a hand?" she called over the rain. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, car died on me. Won't even turn over now." She came closer, offered me the umbrella, and crouched down by the hood. I'm not a mechanic, but I know a little about cars. "Wanting to take a look?" Ich blinkte her. This stranger, soaked in rain, offering to check under the hood like she was born to do it. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. She popped the hood, propped it up, and leaned in, shining her phone's flashlight over the engine. "Battery connections look loose," she said. "Got any tools?" "In the trunk, I think," I said, hurrying to grab the kit. For the next 10 minutes, she worked like she'd done this her whole life, tightening connections, testing the ignition with me, and finally giving me the nod to try again. When I turned the key, the engine roared back to life, smooth as if it had never stalled. "You're a miracle worker," I said, shaking my head. She laughed, stepping back. "Not really. My dad's a mechanic. Taught me a thing or two before I left for college. You just got lucky I happened to be driving by." She closed the hood, her hair plastered to her face from the rain. Even then, I couldn't stop staring. There was something about her presence, steady, calm, like she'd been exactly what I needed in that moment. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than she probably realized. "No problem," she said, brushing her hands off. "Just pay it forward someday." She started heading back to her SUV, and I panicked a little at the thought of letting her walk away without even knowing her name. "Wait," I called. "At least let me buy you a coffee or something. You just saved me from calling a tow truck." She tilted her head, hesitating, then gave me a small smile. "Coffee sounds nice. Tomorrow? There's a little cafe on Main Street, across from the bookstore." "Yeah," I said immediately, maybe a little too eagerly. "Tomorrow." She slid back in her SUV, waved, and drove off, taillights disappearing into the rain. I stood there on the side of the road, soaked but grinning like an idiot. I didn't even know her name yet, but I felt something shift in me. The next day, I got to the cafe early, nervous in a way I hadn't been since high school dates. When she walked in, shaking off the cold, I felt like the whole place got warmer. "Hey," she said, smiling like we were already old friends. "I'm Lily." "Alex," I said. "Thanks again for, rescuing me from the storm." We ordered coffee and sat by the window, and what started as small talk stretched into hours. She told me about growing up in a small town, helping her dad in the garage, moving to the city for work. I told her about my dead-end job, my family who lived 3 states away, and my half-hearted dreams of doing something that actually mattered. She listened like she actually cared, not just nodding, not just waiting for her turn to talk. She asked questions, laughed at my lame jokes, shared stories that mirrored mine in strange ways. By the time we looked up, the cafe was closing. "Guess we lost track of time," I said, reluctantly standing. "Guess so," she said, smiling. "We should do this again." That was the beginning. What I didn't know then was how quickly coffee would turn into late-night phone calls, random walks in the park, dinners that lasted until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs. I didn't know how much I'd look forward to every message, how natural it would feel to share pieces of my life with her, or how much her laughter would stick in my head when I was having a bad day. And I definitely didn't know how soon she'd meet my family and change the way I saw them forever. It happened a month later when my sister called, asking if I could come home for a weekend. My mom wasn't doing great. Her health had been shaky, and she needed help around the house. I debated saying no, because family visits were always complicated, but Lily encouraged me. "You should go," she said softly. "Family matters more than you think. I'll come with you if you want." "You'd really do that?" I asked, surprised. "Of course," she said. "I want to be there for you." That weekend, she drove with me to my hometown, 3 hours away. And what I expected to be a tense, stressful visit turned into something else entirely, because Lily had this way of easing everyone's guard. She helped my mom cook, listened to my dad's long stories, played cards with my sister like they'd known each other forever. By the time we left, my family wasn't just thanking me for coming. They were thanking her. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread going back home. That trip was just the beginning of something bigger, something I wasn't ready to admit to myself yet. But deep down, I knew Lily wasn't just someone who helped me on a rainy night. She was someone who was about to change my whole life. Lily fit into my life so seamlessly that sometimes I wondered if she'd been meant to stumble into my world that night on the road. But life, as I'd learned, doesn't just hand you perfect moments, it tests them. After that weekend with my family, things between us deepened fast. I found myself craving her presence, not in some desperate, clingy way, but because she had this ability to make even the most ordinary day feel like it had purpose. A grocery run turned into a comedy show with her pushing the cart like it was a race car. Folding laundry together became an excuse for her to toss socks at me until we were both doubled over laughing. But there were heavier moments too. My mom's health wasn't improving, and some nights I'd get calls from my sister, worried and overwhelmed. I'd hang up the phone, shoulders heavy with the weight of being far away. Every time, Lily was right there, grounding me. One night, after a particularly rough call where my sister had cried about hospital bills and exhaustion, I sat in silence on Lily's couch, staring at the floor. "You're thinking about moving back, aren't you?" she asked gently. I looked up, startled. "How did you know?" She set her tea down and took my hand. "Because I know you, and because you'd never forgive yourself if you weren't there when they needed you most." The truth hit me so hard I couldn't even argue. "But what about us?" I asked, voice cracking. "I don't want to lose this." She squeezed my hand. "Then don't. Who says love can't survive a move? If anything, it'll show us how strong this is." Her confidence floored me. I'd been bracing for disappointment, for her to pull back, but instead, she leaned in closer. "I'll visit," she said. "We'll figure it out. You don't have to choose between me and your family. I want to be part of it, whatever that looks like." It was the first time I realized that maybe, just maybe, I'd found someone who wasn't afraid of the mess of my life. The next few months were a blur of change. I packed up my small apartment, moved back to my hometown, and found work at a local garage, fixing cars alongside my dad. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't what I'd imagined for myself years ago, but it was exactly what my family needed. And Lily kept her word. She visited nearly every other weekend, sometimes bringing books to read while I worked in the garage, other times rolling up her sleeves to help cook meals for my mom. My parents adored her more with each visit. One evening, after dinner, my mom pulled me aside while Lily was washing dishes. "She's good for you," my mom whispered, her voice fragile but firm. "I know," I said quietly. "No, you don't," she insisted, gripping my hand. "You've always carried so much on your shoulders, Alex." But with her, you're lighter. Don't let her go. Those words echoed in my head for weeks. And though I wasn't ready to say it out loud, I knew I loved her. But then came the test I didn't see coming. One Friday, Lily called me late, her voice shaking. "Alex, I might lose my job." I dropped the wrench in my hand. "What? What?" She explained how her company was downsizing, how her position was on the chopping block. "If I lose it, I don't know how I'll afford my apartment," she admitted. My gut reaction was to tell her to pack her things and move in with me. But I bit my tongue, worried it might sound rash. Instead, I said, "We'll figure it out. You're not alone in this." The following weeks were hard on her. I drove to the city every chance I got, sitting with her as she refreshed job postings, holding her when she cried after long interviews that went nowhere. She'd always been my rock, but now it was my turn to be hers. One night, as she sat slumped against me on her couch, I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "You're not your job. You're more than that. And even if the world falls apart, I'll still be right here." She looked up at me, eyes wet but determined. "Do you mean that?" "Of course I do," I said, pulling her closer. It was the first time I realized that love wasn't just about the good days. It was about being willing to stand in the storm together, even when neither of you had an umbrella. Eventually, she did find another job, different, smaller, but steady. By then, the distance between us felt less daunting, like we'd proven something important. And then came the night everything crystallized. It was a quiet Sunday. Lily had come down for the weekend, and we were sitting on my porch, watching the sun dip below the trees. My mom was inside, humming as she knit, and my dad was dozing in his chair. The whole scene felt timeless. "I was scared at first," Lily admitted suddenly. "Scared of what?" I asked. "Of loving you," she said softly, "because it felt too easy, too real. Like I'd finally found the thing I didn't know I was missing. And I thought, what if I lose it? What if I lose you?" Her vulnerability caught me off guard. I turned to face her, taking her hands in mine. "You won't," I promised, "because I'm not going anywhere. You've given me more than you realize, more than just love. You've given me hope again." She blinked, and I saw tears slip down her cheeks. For a moment, words felt too small for everything in my chest. So I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't our first kiss, not by far, but it was the one that felt like the world had gone quiet around us. When we finally pulled back, she whispered, "Alex, I love you." And without hesitation, I said it back. "I love you too." The words hung in the air, simple yet powerful, like they'd always been waiting there between us. Months later, after my mom's health stabilized and Lily had settled into her new job, I knew it was time to take the next step. I didn't make a big show of it. No fireworks, no elaborate plans. Instead, one evening, as we sat together on that same porch where we'd first confessed our love, I pulled a small box from my pocket. Her eyes widened as I opened it, the ring catching the light of the fading sunset. "Lily," I said, my voice steady, "that night in the rain, you saved me in more ways than one. You've been my strength, my peace, my partner in everything that matters. Will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears, nodding so fast it made me grin. "Yes, Alex. 1,000 times yes." I slid the ring onto her finger, and when we kissed, I felt like the journey that began on a rainy roadside had finally led me home. If the story touched you, do me a favor, hit like and subscribe. It helps me keep bringing you stories like this, ones that remind us love is worth holding on to. The rain had just started when I ducked under the awning of a corner cafe. My jacket was soaked, my shoes squeaked, and honestly, I was annoyed with myself for forgetting an umbrella. I wasn't even planning on stopping here. I've been on my way home from work, mentally running through what leftovers I had in the fridge, but the warm glow from inside the cafe pulled me in. The place wasn't crowded. A few people with laptops sat tucked into corners. A couple whispered at a table near the window, and behind the counter stood an older woman with silver hair, tied in a neat bun. She looked up when I walked in, gave me the kind of smile that feels like it belongs to someone who's been greeting strangers her whole life, and said, "Rough night, huh?" "You could say that," I answered, shaking the rain from my sleeves. "Sit anywhere you like, dear. I'll bring you something hot." I didn't argue. I slid into a booth by the window, watching the raindrops streak the glass. Within minutes, she returned with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of pie I hadn't ordered. "On the house," she said firmly, placing them down. "You look like you could use it." That's how I met Rose. What started as one unexpected stop became a pattern. Every time I came back, she had something ready: coffee, soup, sometimes cookies she'd bake herself. She remembered the details of my life after only 1 or 2 visits: my job, the hours I worked, even the fact that I lived alone. One night, after closing up, she sat across from me with her own cup of tea. "You remind me of my grandson," she said, her eyes softening. "He used to sit in that exact booth every Friday night before he moved away." I didn't know what to say at first. "Do you see him often?" "Not really. Life takes people in different directions. But this cafe, it keeps me company." She said it with a smile, but I caught the weight in her words. She'd built this place decades ago with her husband, she told me, and even after he passed, she refused to let it go. This cafe is more than just coffee and pie. It's people, it's stories, it's love, and in some strange way, I felt it too. It wasn't just about me and Rose anymore. On my 3rd or 4th visit, I noticed someone new working behind the counter, a woman around my age with chestnut hair pulled into a messy ponytail, moving quickly as she balanced plates and mugs. She caught my glance and smiled, a quick flash of warmth before she turned back to her work. Later, Rose leaned toward me with a mischievous grin. "That's Lily. She's been helping out here in the evenings. Smart girl, kind heart." The way Rose said it made my ears burn. Over the next few weeks, I saw Lily more often. Sometimes we'd exchange small talk while she wiped down tables or brought me a refill. Other times she'd sit for a few minutes during her break. She told me she'd grown up in town, but had left for college and recently come back to help care for her younger brother after their parents divorced. Life had pulled her in directions she hadn't expected, but she didn't sound bitter, just grounded. I found myself staying longer at the cafe, even when my coffee was finished. Sometimes I bring a book, sometimes just sit and listen to the rain or the quiet hum of conversation. And little by little, Lily and I started to share more than casual chats. One evening, as she set a plate of pie in front of me, she said, "You know, Rose talks about you like your family now." I laughed, but there was something about the way she said it that made my chest tighten in a good way. "And what do you think?" I asked. She tilted her head, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "I think she might be right." That winter, the cafe became more than a shelter from the rain. It became a place where I felt known, where I wasn't just another face rushing through life. Rose treated me like a grandson. Lily became someone I looked forward to seeing more than I wanted to admit, and somewhere along the way, the little cafe on the corner became the heart of my week. But the story didn't stop there, because one night, everything changed. The first snow of the season blanketed the town that night. The cafe windows glowed golden against the pale, icy streets, and I found myself pushing through the door with a sharper anticipation than usual. Something in the air felt different, crisp, almost electric. Rose was behind the counter humming along to a tune on the radio, but Lily wasn't in her usual place. My eyes immediately scanned the room, and when I didn't see her, my chest tightened in a way I wasn't proud of. "Looking for someone?" Rose teased without even glancing up. I tried to play it cool, but my grin gave me away. "Maybe," she chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. "She's in the back, helping with supplies. Give her a minute." I slid into my booth, the one that had unofficially become mine, and tried to shake off the nerves buzzing under my skin. I didn't know why seeing Lily mattered so much, but it did. She wasn't just a friendly face anymore. She wasn't just a girl who refilled my coffee. She was something more, though I hadn't dared to name it. Minutes later, Lily appeared, pushing through the swinging door with a crate in her arms. When she spotted me, her eyes lit up in a way that sent warmth shooting through me. "You're early tonight," she said, setting the crate down on the counter. "Couldn't stay away," I admitted. Her cheeks flushed, and though she didn't say anything, the look in her eyes told me she'd heard more than I said out loud. As December rolled on, the cafe transformed. Garlands wrapped around the windows, twinkling lights framed the door, and Rose insisted on playing holiday music even when no one else was around. Lily and I grew closer in those weeks, sharing stories, laughing until the customers gave us odd looks, and sometimes just sitting together in companionable silence. But one night, after most of the crowd had left, I walked in to find Lily sitting at a table with her head in her hands. The sight stopped me cold. "You okay?" I asked softly, sliding into the chair across from her. She lifted her head, eyes red-rimmed. "It's my brother. His grades are slipping. I've been trying to help him, but I don't know if it's enough. He needs more than I can give right now." The vulnerability in her voice twisted at something inside me. I reached across the table, hesitating for a moment before placing my hand gently over hers. "You're not alone in this. Maybe I can help." Her lips trembled into a small smile. "Why would you do that?" I shrugged, though my heart was pounding. "Because I care, and because I don't want you to feel like you have to carry everything by yourself." She didn't say anything right away. Instead, she squeezed my hand, her eyes shimmering in the dim cafe light. Helping her brother became part of my life in ways I hadn't expected. I'd stop by after work to go over homework with him, or we'd play basketball in the driveway when he was too restless to sit still. Slowly, he started opening up to me, and I could see the weight lifting off Lily's shoulders. One evening, after I'd finished quizzing him for an upcoming test, Lily walked me to the porch. Snow crunched beneath our feet, our breath forming little clouds in the cold air. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." I looked at her, the street lamp casting a soft glow on her face. "Actually, I think I do." For a moment, it felt like the world held its breath. Then she leaned in, closing the space between us, and our lips met in a kiss that was tender, hesitant, and yet filled with something undeniable. When we pulled apart, she whispered, "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "Me too," I admitted, my heart soaring. From that night on, things between us shifted. We weren't just two people trading smiles across a cafe anymore. We were something more, something that scared me a little because of how much it mattered, but also something I knew I couldn't walk away from. Rose, of course, noticed immediately. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen while Lily was out front. "You've fallen for her," she said, eyes twinkling with mischief. I opened my mouth to deny it, but she held up a hand. "Don't bother. I've been around long enough to know what love looks like." Heat crept up my neck. "Is it that obvious?" She patted my arm, her expression softening. "Only to those who care enough to see it. Just don't hurt her. She's been through more than she lets on." Her words stuck with me, and that night, as I walked Lily home, I found myself blurting out, "I don't ever want to hurt you." She blinked at me in surprise. "Where's that coming from?" "Rose, she told me to take care of you. And she's right. You deserve that." Lily's expression softened, and she leaned against me as we walked. Then maybe we're both exactly where we're supposed to be. By spring, the cafe wasn't just Rose's anymore. It was ours. I'd started helping out on weekends, and Lily and I spent more time together than apart. Her brother was doing better, smiling more, and even teasing us whenever he caught us holding hands. But the moment that sealed everything came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Rose gathered us in the cafe, her hands folded in front of her, and said, "I've been thinking. This place won't be mine forever. And when that time comes, I'd like to know it'll be in good hands." "In your hands?" Lily gasped. "Rose, you can't." "Yes, I can," Rose interrupted firmly. "This cafe was built on love. And love is what the two of you bring every time you step through that door. It belongs with you." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, my chest full. Lily reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it hard. And in that moment, I realized she was right. We were exactly where we were supposed to be. And maybe, just maybe, the cafe wasn't just where our story started. It was where it would always belong. If this story touched you, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It keeps me motivated to bring you more stories like this one. The first time I saw Emma, she was balancing two grocery bags on one arm and trying to keep a toddler from darting into the parking lot with the other. It was chaos, cereal boxes sliding out of the bags, the little boy tugging toward freedom, and Emma herself laughing despite the mess. I don't know why I stopped. I just finished my own shopping, my trunk half full, and I could have easily kept walking. But something in the way she smiled at her son while juggling everything made me slow down. "You need a hand?" I called. She looked up, strands of hair falling loose around her face. "If you don't mind," she said with a breathless laugh. "That would be amazing." I grabbed the runaway cereal box before it hit the pavement, slid it back in her bag, and offered, "Here, let me carry one of those for you." "Thanks," she said, relief flooding her expression. I swear he thinks parking lots are playgrounds. Her son, a mop-haired little guy of maybe 3 or 4, giggled as if proving her point. That was it. Just a moment in a grocery store parking lot. But it stuck with me. A week later, I saw her again, this time inside the grocery store, pushing her cart while her son insisted on helping by tossing random items into it. She caught me looking and laughed. "Well, if it isn't my parking lot hero," she said. I grinned. "And if it isn't the cereal box juggler." We fell in an easy conversation, the kind that didn't feel forced. She introduced herself as Emma, her son as Caleb, and I told her my name. She was a single mom, recently moved to town to be closer to her parents, and still adjusting to the rhythm of raising a child mostly on her own. By the time we both reached the checkout line, it felt like we'd known each other longer than 15 minutes. "Hey," I said before she could disappear into the parking lot again. "If you ever need a break, or just another set of hands with Caleb, I'd be happy to help." She hesitated, clearly torn between politeness and wariness. Then she smiled. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." I didn't expect her to take me up on it. But 2 weeks later, I was walking past the neighborhood park when I heard my name. Emma was there with Caleb, who was mid-swing and demanding, "Higher, Mommy. Higher." "You meant it, right?" she asked, shading her eyes against the sun. "About helping out sometimes?" "Of course," I said. And that's how it started. I began spending afternoons at the park with them, pushing Caleb on the swings, chasing him across the grass, helping him build lopsided sandcastles. At first, I thought I was just being a friend, someone to lighten Emma's load. But the more time I spent with them, the more I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just helping. I was becoming part of their little world. Emma was cautious at first. She never left Caleb alone with me, never let herself lean too much on what I offered. But slowly, trust grew. One evening, after I helped carry groceries up to her apartment, she said quietly, "You don't have to keep doing this, you know. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," I said firmly. "I like being here." Her eyes searched mine, like she was trying to see if I really meant it. Whatever she found there must have convinced her, because she smiled, a small, vulnerable smile that hit me harder than it should have. The more time we spent together, the more I learned about her life. She told me about her ex, who'd walked out before Caleb was born, about the years of scraping by, juggling 2 jobs and childcare, about how she'd promised herself never to depend on anyone again. Listening to her, I felt something growing inside me that went beyond friendship. It was respect, admiration, and something softer, something I didn't want to name yet. One night, after Caleb had fallen asleep on the couch during movie night, Emma and I sat side by side, the glow of the TV flickering across her face. She turned to me suddenly and whispered, "You're really good with him? You know that?" I shrugged, trying to play it off, though my chest swelled at her words. "He's a great kid. Makes it easy." But she shook her head. "It's more than that. You're patient. You see him. Not everyone does." There was something in her voice that made me look at her differently, and for a heartbeat, I thought we might cross a line. But then she blinked, breaking the moment, and stood to carry Caleb to bed. Still, the thought lingered. By spring, we had a rhythm. Caleb had started calling me Uncle without any prompting, and Emma didn't correct him. We spent weekends at the zoo, afternoons at the park, quiet evenings cooking dinner together. I wasn't sure what label to put on what we had, but I knew one thing. It felt real. Then, one evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset while Caleb played with toy cars at our feet, Emma turned to me. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "You've done more for us than I can ever repay." Sometimes I wonder why. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "Because you and Caleb matter to me. More than I expected. More than I know how to explain." Her eyes glistened, and she whispered, "You matter to us too." And just like that, I realized we weren't 2 separate worlds anymore. We were becoming one. But what I didn't know was that the real test, the moment that would define what we meant to each other, was still ahead. The first time I realized things had changed between Emma and me, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost imperceptible. We were in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Caleb at the table building a fortress out of Legos, humming happily to himself. I reached for a cutting board at the same time she did, and our hands brushed. "Sorry," she said, but didn't pull away. I smiled, feeling that strange warmth in my chest again, the one that had been growing since the moment I'd helped her with those grocery bags. "You know," I said, trying to sound casual, "I think we make a pretty good team." She laughed softly. "Yeah, we do." It was in that moment I realized it wasn't just about helping Emma or being part of Caleb's life. I wanted to be there for her, really be there. Not just as a friend, not just as a helper, but as someone she could count on, someone she could lean on. Over the next few weeks, the dynamic between us deepened in ways that were subtle but powerful. Caleb started confiding in me more, asking me to read stories to him before bed, to play board games, to help with homework. I could see the trust in his eyes, the comfort of knowing someone had his back. Emma noticed too. She'd glance at me across the room, a soft smile on her face, and then busy herself with cooking or cleaning. I never asked for confirmation. Her small gestures spoke volumes. One Friday evening, after a particularly chaotic week at her office, Emma came home looking drained. Caleb ran to greet her, throwing his arms around her legs, and I followed behind, carrying her grocery bags without a word. She leaned against the counter, sighing heavily. "Rough day?" I asked. She nodded. "You could say that. Everything that could go wrong did." Without hesitation, I went over and put a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, you're not alone. I got you." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she just nodded, appreciating the unspoken support. As spring turned to summer, our lives started to intertwine completely. Weekends became family time. Trips to the park, spontaneous picnics, movie nights at home with Caleb sprawled across the couch between us. Emma began to let me into her world fully, sharing stories from her past, dreams she hadn't told anyone, even fears she carried silently for years. I listened, always, and in return, she listened to me, laughed at my stupid jokes, and sometimes rolled her eyes when I got overdramatic about nothing at all. One evening, after Caleb had fallen asleep on the balcony in his small sleeping bag, Emma and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one. The air was warm, filled with the scent of summer blooms. "You've changed my life," she said quietly, almost to herself. I turned to her. "No, you've changed mine. You and Caleb both. I never expected this." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile, and reached for my hand. Neither did I. It wasn't all easy, of course. Emma had her doubts, worries about letting someone in. I had mine, questions about whether I could truly be the support she needed, the father figure Caleb deserved, and the partner she deserved. There were moments of tension, miscommunications, unspoken frustrations, days when life felt too heavy. But every time we worked through it, together. One particularly tough afternoon, Emma had a meltdown after a conflict with her boss, tears streaming down her face, Caleb clinging to her leg. I didn't know what to do at first, but I held her, letting her cry on my shoulder, and Caleb climbed onto my lap, wrapping his arms around both of us. That night, after we'd calmed down, Emma looked at me with gratitude in her eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You'll never have to find out," I said, trying to be as reassuring as possible. The culmination of everything came unexpectedly. It was Caleb's birthday, a small party in the backyard with a few neighbors and his preschool friends. Emma had been stressed for days, planning every detail, making sure it was perfect. I had offered to handle most of it, letting her rest. Watching her interact with Caleb, seeing her laugh freely for the first time in weeks, I realized that I loved this family, loved her, loved him, loved the life we were building together. As the sun began to set, Caleb ran over to me with a cupcake in hand. "Blow out the candle, Uncle." I laughed, kneeling beside him. As I did, Emma approached, standing behind him, hands resting on his shoulders. Our eyes met, and I could see it in hers, the same realization I just had. You know, she said softly, I think it feels right. I nodded, unable to find words that felt adequate. So instead, I took her hand, gave a gentle squeeze, and smiled. That summer evening, as Caleb fell asleep with his head resting on my shoulder, Emma leaned against me. Thank you, she whispered. For what? I asked, already knowing the answer. For being here. For everything. For choosing us. And I did. Every day. Because sometimes family isn't about biology. Sometimes love isn't about what you expected. And sometimes the most unexpected people end up being the ones who change your life entirely. If you enjoy being part of their little world, hit like and subscribe. It motivates me to share more real, heartwarming stories like this every day. I never thought a random encounter at the coffee shop could change the way I viewed my whole life. I was in my usual corner, laptop open, headphones on, pretending to work while secretly people watching. That's when I noticed her. She was struggling with a stroller, a toddler in one arm, a grocery bag in the other, and a blanket draped awkwardly over the top of the stroller like some kind of makeshift shield. I hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone else would help, but no one did. My gut kicked in. Hey, do you need a hand? I asked, hopping up from my seat. She looked up, surprise written all over her face, and then relief. Oh yes, please. Thank you so much. I approached and helped her steady the stroller while she adjusted the blanket and groceries. The toddler peeked out with big, curious eyes and a toothless grin. I couldn't help but smile back. I'm Luke, I said, offering my hand once everything was balanced. Emma, she replied, shaking it. And this is Mia. She gestured to the tiny toddler, who waved shyly. That simple introduction led to a conversation. One coffee turned into two. We laughed at small things, shared stories about our past, our struggles, our families. There was an ease in talking to her that I hadn't felt with anyone in years. Over the next few weeks, I found myself seeking her out, sometimes at the same coffee shop, sometimes running into her at the grocery store. Each meeting felt effortless. We talked about work, life, and dreams. She told me about her parents, who had passed away a few years back, leaving her to raise Mia alone. I listened. I didn't offer platitudes. I offered attention and understanding, which seemed to matter more than anything. One Saturday, I invited her to a local farmer's market. I carried the stroller. She held Mia's hand, and together we wandered through the stalls. She picked out flowers for the table. I grabbed fresh bread and pastries. We ended up at a small park nearby, sharing a picnic blanket and feeding Mia little pieces of bread. I don't know why, but I feel like I've known you forever, she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the crowd. Me too, I admitted. I guess some connections are just instant. It wasn't long before our weekends became shared rituals. Movie nights, baking days, board games with Mia laughing in between. Emma began trusting me more, confiding not just in passing moments but about her fears and struggles. I felt protective over both of them, but also inspired. There were bumps along the way, of course. Emma's ex-husband occasionally popped up, making subtle remarks that unsettled her. I wasn't sure how much to say or do, but I stayed calm, patient. I realized that showing stability and consistency mattered more than grand gestures. One rainy afternoon, we were stuck inside after a trip to the park. Mia was cranky, Emma was stressed, and I could feel tension building. I suggested a baking session to distract ourselves. Flour went everywhere. Laughter erupted. By the time we finished, the kitchen looked like a storm had passed through, but Emma was smiling. You're a little crazy, you know that? She said, brushing flour off her hair. And you love it, I teased, grinning. She rolled her eyes, but didn't deny it. That night, after Mia fell asleep, she stayed up talking with me. Deep talks that went on for hours, about hopes, regrets, and dreams for the future. I realized that in her, I had found someone I wanted to build something lasting with. Summer came, and with it, the heat and long days. We spent afternoons at the pool, weekends hiking trails nearby, and evenings watching Mia chase fireflies in the yard. I watched Emma interact with her daughter, the patience, the love, the small smiles that lit her face. I was falling completely and irrevocably, and I knew she felt the same way. One evening, sitting on the porch swing, Mia asleep inside, Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. "Luke, I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, "but I know I want you in it." I held her tighter, feeling a warmth that went beyond physical comfort. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." We were careful, knowing that blending our lives wasn't as simple as a romantic gesture. It was about trust, patience, and consistency. But the bond between us grew stronger every day. Every laugh, every shared meal, every quiet moment added to the foundation we were building together. Then came the unexpected. Emma's company offered her a transfer to another city, months away. The news shook us both. I could see the worry in her eyes, the fear of leaving what we had nurtured. I had to make a choice. Let circumstances dictate our lives, or fight for what we had. "I don't want to leave," she admitted one evening, tears brimming. "You don't have to go alone," I said. "We'll figure this out together. Mia, you, me, we're a team." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't easy. There were long discussions, planning logistics, making sure Mia's school, her friends, and our jobs were all considered. But through it all, our connection never wavered. By the time the day of the move arrived, we were more than ready. We loaded the car, packed up her apartment, and made the drive. Mia sang songs in the back seat. Emma held my hand, and I felt a sense of calm and anticipation for what lay ahead. In the weeks following the move, life settled into a new rhythm. New neighborhoods, new friends, and a fresh start. Emma and I found ways to grow closer every day, sharing small victories and comforting each other through minor setbacks. One Sunday morning, after breakfast on our small balcony, Mia ran over and hugged both of us tightly. "I love us," she said innocently. I glanced at Emma, her eyes misty with emotion, and smiled. "Me too, kiddo. Me too." And in that simple declaration, I realized the truth. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other every day through ordinary moments and extraordinary challenges alike. The first few weeks in our new city were a whirlwind. Boxes still lined the living room, Mia's toys scattered across the floor, and Emma's work schedule had ramped up dramatically. Despite the chaos, there was a calm undercurrent in our lives, the quiet understanding that we were building something lasting. Every morning, I made it a point to get up early, brew coffee, and prepare breakfast for the two of them. It became a ritual, the smell of pancakes, fresh fruit, and coffee filling the apartment, Mia's sleepy giggles as she rubbed her eyes, and Emma's tired smile when she walked into the kitchen. Those small, consistent acts grounded us. One Saturday, I suggested we explore a nearby park that Emma had spotted on her morning jog. The air was crisp, leaves rustling in early autumn hues. Mia ran ahead, laughing and chasing squirrels, while Emma and I walked hand in hand, savoring the moment. "I was nervous about this move," she admitted, her thumb tracing circles on my palm. "I didn't want to leave our old home, or with the people we knew. But being here with you and Mia, I feel like we've landed exactly where we're supposed to be." I squeezed her hand. Life's always a bit unpredictable, but if we face it together, it doesn't feel scary anymore. We spent the afternoon hiking, sharing stories about our childhoods, and laughing at Mia's endless energy. At some point, we found a small clearing, and I watched Emma sit down on a log, pulling Mia on her lap. They looked like a little world of their own, and I felt a rush of warmth and gratitude. Back at the apartment, evenings became our time. After dinner, Mia would curl up with a book or her favorite stuffed animal, while Emma and I unwound on the couch. We'd talk about the day, share our frustrations, celebrate small wins, and plan the future. One night, as rain pattered against the windows, Emma confided something that had been on her mind. "I've been thinking a lot about stability, about what I want for Mia and us. And I realized I want to commit to building a life with you. Not just casually, not just for convenience. Truly, fully." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been feeling the same way, but hadn't dared to say it out loud. "Emma, I want that too. I've never felt this certain about anyone before." We embraced, a quiet understanding settling between us. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was steady, grounded, real. And in that moment, I knew we were on the same path. Life threw little challenges at us, as it always does. There were days when Emma's work demanded extra hours, leaving her exhausted. Days when Mia was sick and I had to stay home from work to care for her. Days when bills stacked up and frustrations boiled over. But through every moment, we learned to communicate, compromise, and support each other. One evening, Mia came home from school with a project she had made, a handmade family tree with our faces drawn in. She had written our names underneath, and the care she had taken to include each detail brought tears to both our eyes. "We're a team, Mia," I said softly, ruffling her hair. "Always." Emma nodded, squeezing my shoulder. "Always." The little moments, the ones often overlooked, became the foundation of our bond. Movie nights, cooking experiments, bedtime stories, morning walks, and shared laughter slowly turned our apartment into a home. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence and love. Months passed, and the seasons changed. Fall turned to winter, and we experienced our first snow together. Emma and I spent hours shoveling the driveway, Mia running around in her little snow boots, building snowmen and creating snow angels. That day, I realized how deeply intertwined our lives had become, not just emotionally, but in routines, habits, and shared joy. We started planning small adventures, weekend trips, visits to museums, and day hikes. We invited new friends into our lives, forming a small support network in a city that once felt unfamiliar. Emma's career thrived, and I found fulfillment in my work, but the highlight of each day remained the same: seeing Mia's bright eyes and Emma's smile. One evening, after a particularly long day, we sat on the balcony with mugs of cocoa. Mia was tucked in bed, and the city lights twinkled below us. "I never knew life could feel so full," Emma whispered, resting her head on my shoulder. "I don't mean the stuff we do or have. It's the feeling, the love, the support, the comfort. It's everything I hoped for and more." I kissed her forehead. "It's because we chose it together. Every day, we choose each other, and that's what makes it real." Time continued to pass, bringing both routine and new experiences. We navigated challenges: Mia's school transitions, Emma's demanding job, and even my own career hurdles, but always returned to the core of our family. There were evenings when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm us, but a shared laugh, a reassuring touch, or Mia's innocent antics reminded us why we persisted. One summer night, we decided to camp in a nearby state park. Tents set up, fire crackling, stars scattered across the sky. We shared stories and roasted marshmallows. Mia's laughter echoed through the trees as Emma and I exchanged glances, silently acknowledging how far we had come. "I can't imagine doing this with anyone else," Emma said, her voice soft against the night. "Me neither," I replied. "It's perfect because it's us." Over the following months, we faced deeper commitments. We discussed moving into a bigger house, planning for Mia's future, and integrating our finances. These conversations weren't always easy, but the foundation of trust we had built allowed us to navigate them without fear or resentment. I realized that love isn't always grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's consistency, presence, and vulnerability. Emma had shown me that by opening her life and heart, and I had reciprocated in kind. Together, we cultivated a life that wasn't flawless, but was profoundly fulfilling. One winter morning, as snowflakes drifted outside, Emma surprised me with a small, handmade scrapbook. It contained snapshots of our life together: Mia's first steps, our weekend adventures, quiet evenings at home, and small candid moments that captured our bond. "You see," she said, pointing to the photos. "This is us. Imperfect, chaotic, beautiful ours." I smiled, overwhelmed with emotion. "And it's just the beginning." As the days turned into years, we continued to grow as a family. Our love matured, deepened, and strengthened through challenges, joys, and the mundane rhythms of everyday life. The bond we shared with Mia expanded beyond simple care. It became a deep, mutual respect, and affection that shaped our lives. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and milestones with intentionality and care. We supported each other's ambitions, offered comfort during setbacks, and found joy in ordinary moments. And through it all, we never lost sight of the simple truth that brought us together. Choosing each other every day with patience, love, and trust. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Each day offered a chance to nurture, laugh, and grow together. And as I watched Emma and Mia sleeping peacefully one evening, I knew that the random encounter in that coffee shop months ago had transformed into a lifelong journey of love, commitment, and family. If you felt connected to this story and it reminded you of the power of love, support, and family, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really encourages me to share more heartfelt, real-life stories with you. I had always considered myself someone who preferred a quiet, predictable life. Routine brought comfort. Early mornings with coffee, evenings with a book, weekends filled with long walks. Life didn't have to be dramatic to be satisfying. But then Clara walked into my small-town bookstore one rainy afternoon, and suddenly the predictable felt mundane. She wasn't the type to just browse the shelves casually. Her eyes scanned each section with curiosity, fingers tracing the spines as if she were searching for something specific, though she didn't know exactly what. When our eyes met over a shelf of novels, there was an immediate, unspoken recognition, a spark that neither of us could define but both felt. Looking for anything in particular? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. She smiled, a subtle curve of her lips that made the rainy afternoon seem warmer. Honestly, I'm not sure. Something that feels real. Something I can connect with. I nodded, understanding more than she realized. I think I can help with that, I said, guiding her through a few titles that had always felt alive to me. Books that weren't just stories, but reflections of human emotion and connection. Clara lingered, asking questions about the authors, sharing her thoughts on the characters, and laughing at passages that struck her as particularly witty or poignant. The hours slipped by unnoticed, the rain outside forming a steady background rhythm to our conversation. By the time she left, she had purchased 3 books, and I had a new understanding. Sometimes life shakes up your routine in the quietest, most unexpected ways. Over the following weeks, Clara returned regularly. Sometimes it was to exchange books, other times just to talk. We discussed literature, shared life stories, and slowly, organically, our connection deepened. There was no rush, no pressure, just 2 people finding solace and understanding in each other's company. One afternoon, she confided something personal. I moved here not too long ago. Honestly, it's been lonely. I didn't know anyone, and starting over is harder than I expected. I nodded, genuinely empathetic. I get that. Small towns can feel isolating, but sometimes you find the right people at the right time. And I think you found a place here. You're not alone anymore. Her smile was small but genuine, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond growing between us. Thanks, she whispered. As autumn arrived, our lives became intertwined in subtle ways. I found myself thinking about her between work shifts, imagining what her day had been like, and looking forward to our conversations. She began leaving notes in books she borrowed, small thoughts, or quotes she liked. And I responded in kind, a silent dialogue growing richer with every exchange. One chilly October morning, Clara called, voice hesitant. Would you want to go for a walk? There's a market nearby, and I thought, maybe we could check it out together. The walk turned into hours, wandering between stalls, tasting treats, and sharing stories of our childhoods, families, and hopes. It wasn't just the act of walking together that mattered. It was the rhythm, the shared laughter, the comfort of someone who seemed to understand without judgment. On our way back, as the sun dipped low in the sky, I realized I had developed feelings I hadn't anticipated. The quiet bond, the laughter, the shared stories, they had grown into something warm and significant. Clara stopped at a small fountain in the town square, turning to me with a serious, almost shy expression. I'm glad we met, she said softly. You made this town feel more like home than I expected. I smiled, feeling the weight of unspoken emotions. I feel the same way, I admitted. I didn't know life could feel this full just by knowing someone. We walked back in silence, the quiet of the evening amplifying the intimacy of the moment. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was the slow, natural deepening of trust, friendship, and something more. As weeks turned into months, our routines began to overlap seamlessly. Saturday mornings meant breakfast together, often at the small cafe next to the bookstore. We tried new recipes, shared favorite films, and slowly introduced each other to the broader community. Clara's warmth and humor made gatherings easier, and my steady, calm presence seemed to offer her reassurance. One evening, while watching the sunset from the bookstore's rooftop, an impromptu tradition we had started, I realized how deeply she had become part of my life. We talked about dreams, fears, and future aspirations. Her voice carried a mixture of excitement and hesitation as she described her desire to pursue a passion project she had long shelved. I've always wanted to start a small publishing house, she said, eyes shining. But I never thought I'd have the support or courage to actually do it. I reached for her hand. You don't have to do it alone. If you want, I'll help. Every step of the way. Her smile was radiant, a mix of relief, gratitude, and something tender that made my heart race. Really? You do that? Of course, I replied. You've already changed my life. I'd do anything to help you chase yours. Winter arrived, bringing both challenges and magic. Snow blanketed the streets, and we spent hours walking through drifts, hot chocolate in hand, laughing as we tried to navigate icy sidewalks. We hosted cozy evenings at the bookstore, inviting friends and neighbors, sharing warmth and stories. One particularly snowy night, Clara and I were the last ones in the store. We sat on the floor among scattered books, talking about life, love, and everything in between. The snow fell gently outside, a silent backdrop to our growing intimacy. I don't want to imagine my life without you, she said suddenly, her voice quiet but steady. I felt the same tug in my chest, a mixture of awe, warmth, and certainty. You won't have to, I said. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. We embraced then, a slow, deliberate moment that felt inevitable after months of shared laughter, conversation, and companionship. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was the natural, inevitable next step in our journey together. As the months turned into a full year, our bond strengthened. Clara's publishing project came to life, and I supported her in every way possible. Editing manuscripts, handling logistics, and simply being present. Our lives intertwined, not only romantically, but professionally, creatively, and emotionally. Mornings became even more cherished, waking up to shared coffee, planning days, and celebrating small victories. Evenings remained a time of quiet reflection, laughter, and the simple comfort of each other's presence. We had challenges, of course. There were disagreements, moments of doubt, and days when the outside world's pressures weighed heavily. But the foundation of trust and care we had built allowed us to navigate difficulties without fear or resentment. One spring afternoon, as cherry blossoms fell gently around us, Clara and I sat on a park bench, watching life move in all its beautiful chaos. We've come a long way, she said softly, hand in mine. I never imagined life could feel this rich and full. Neither did I admitted. But here we are together. That's what matters. And in that quiet, shared acknowledgement, I knew that the path ahead, whatever challenges it might hold, would always be richer because we faced it together. Life continued to flow with its predictable unpredictability. There were moments of joy, frustration, wonder, and ordinary comfort. But through it all, Clara and I remained anchored to each other, our connection deepening naturally, a testament to patience, understanding, and shared dreams. The bookstore, the park walks, the coffee mornings, all of it became a tapestry of life woven with care, love, and presence. And as I watched Clara laughing at some small absurdity with a customer, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life could be beautiful, Not because it was perfect, but because it was shared with someone who mattered. It had been weeks since the tension started in our house, a quiet strain that neither of us dared address directly. I tried to tell myself it was just stress from work, the usual ebb and flow of life, but deep down I knew it was something more. The mornings felt heavier, the air thicker, and every casual glance carried a weight that had never been there before. I caught him staring at his phone too often, a small smile curling at times that didn't match any conversation we were having. I wanted to believe it was innocent, that I was reading too much into things, but something in my gut whispered otherwise. That Friday, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had plans to meet a friend for dinner, a brief escape from the looming atmosphere at home. But even as I walked out the door, I felt eyes on me, the subtle tension of someone watching from the other side of the room. Driving to the restaurant, I tried to push out of my mind, but texts from him kept flashing on my screen, brief, casual messages that seemed almost too calculated. Have a good time. Don't stay out too late. Little nudges that sounded caring on the surface, but felt controlling, like a reminder of a presence I wasn't supposed to ignore. At the restaurant, I met with my friend, laughing and sharing stories, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being pulled back. Every notification made my chest tighten, each vibration a reminder that there was something unresolved, something lurking just beyond what I could see. After dinner, I walked to my car, pulling out my phone. That's when I noticed the unfamiliar number. A message popped up. "I think you should know before it's too late." My heart skipped a beat. I opened it, and the words confirmed everything I had feared and more. The messages detailed small interactions, subtle secrets, everything that he had tried to hide, a network of lies that stretched far beyond what I'd imagined. I didn't know who sent it, only that it was clear, precise, and painfully honest. The details were enough to make me stop cold in the parking lot, my mind spinning. Each revelation hurt, not just because of the betrayal, but because it painted a picture of someone I thought I knew, someone I had trusted. I felt anger, confusion, and heartbreak collide all at once. My hands shook as I dialed his number, but he didn't pick up. I left a message, my voice breaking despite my attempt to keep it steady. "We need to talk. Now." The next morning was quiet, eerily quiet, as if the house itself held its breath. He was there, but the air between us had changed, electric and tense. I confronted him, showing the messages, each one a nail in the trust we had built. He didn't deny it. Instead, he offered excuses, half-hearted apologies, trying to soften the edges of what was unforgivable. But I couldn't hear them, not really. The words were empty, floating in the space where honesty should have been. I walked out of the room, needing space, needing air, needing to feel anything other than the ache in my chest. Over the next few days, we danced around the truth, a careful choreography of avoidance and confrontation. He tried to explain, to rationalize, but each explanation only made the betrayal more vivid. I found myself replaying moments in my head, conversations, late nights, unexplained absences, and everything fit too neatly into a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. I began documenting everything, writing notes, saving messages, trying to make sense of the chaos. It felt like a war inside my own home, a battlefield of emotions where no one could win. I reached out to close friends, needing perspective, needing validation. Their words were gentle but firm. "You deserve honesty," they said. "You deserve someone who shows up for you fully." And that clarity, simple as it was, gave me strength I didn't know I had. I started planning, small steps at first, a call to our landlord, checking options, preparing for a life that might not include him. Each decision was painful, a reminder of how deeply I had trusted someone who had shattered that trust. Then, a week later, he tried to reach me, leaving a note on the kitchen counter, a simple apology that seemed both sincere and inadequate. I read it twice, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and relief. I realized that closure wouldn't come from him, not really. It would come from me, from the choices I made moving forward, from reclaiming my life piece by piece. I started looking at my future, imagining days free from lies, nights where I could sleep without second-guessing every sound. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I began reconnecting with old hobbies, the ones I had abandoned when life had become so focused on maintaining appearances. Painting, walking, reading late into the night. Small acts of reclaiming joy, tiny rebellions against the weight of betrayal. Each moment reminded me that I was more than this situation, more than the lies and secrets. And as I rebuilt, the anger I had carried slowly began to fade, replaced with a quiet resolve. I knew healing wasn't linear, but for the first time in weeks, I felt the possibility of peace. One evening, while walking through the neighborhood park, I saw a couple laughing together on a bench, holding hands, completely absorbed in each other. I didn't feel envy. I felt hope. Hope that connection and honesty weren't impossible, that there were people in the world who could offer the trust and love I had once imagined. It was a small, ordinary moment, but it carried the weight of promise. I allowed myself a tiny smile, letting the warmth of that possibility sink in. Back home, I made a decision. I would live fully in the life I had, without waiting for apologies or trying to salvage what was broken beyond repair. I set boundaries, reaffirmed my self-worth, and started making plans for a fresh start. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer defined me. I had agency again, the ability to create a life built on honesty and respect. And slowly, step by step, I started to embrace it. Even though the betrayal had cut deeply, it had also shown me the resilience I hadn't realized I possessed. I began journaling daily, capturing moments of clarity, gratitude, and small victories. Each entry reinforced the lessons I had learned about trust, about boundaries, and about valuing myself enough to walk away when necessary. Friends and family noticed the change, commenting on my renewed energy and sense of purpose. And it felt good, powerful even, to reclaim my narrative from someone who had tried to rewrite it with deceit. Months passed. Life slowly returned to a new normal, one that felt lighter, freer. I found joy in the little things. Morning coffee on the porch, walks in the park, laughter shared with friends. Each day was a reminder that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about building a future that honored my worth. And when I finally looked at my reflection in the mirror without flinching, without questioning myself, I knew that the chapter had closed. Not with his words or apologies, but with my own strength and resolve. The journey had been painful, full of sleepless nights and moments of doubt, but it had also been transformative. I had learned that love and trust are precious, and when they're broken, it is not weakness to walk away. It is courage. And as I moved forward, I carried those lessons with me, allowing them to guide my choices, shape my relationships, and protect the life I had worked so hard to rebuild. Every step was mine, every decision my own, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. The morning after everything had happened, I woke up to a quiet apartment that felt colder than it had ever been. I could still feel the weight of the argument from last night pressing on my chest, but there was something else too, a gnawing uncertainty that refused to let me think clearly. Coffee in hand, I paced the small kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the blinds creating long stripes on the floor, and tried to focus on anything besides the tension that had erupted between us. I decided that the best way to handle it was to step out, clear my head, and get some air. Walking down the streets of our neighborhood, I noticed everything as if it were for the first time. The neighbor walking his dog, the little bakery opening its doors, the distant hum of traffic. And yet, no matter how ordinary the scene, my mind was tethered to last night, to the conversation that had left me feeling vulnerable, exposed, and unsure. When I returned, I found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pretending as though the night before had been nothing more than a minor disagreement. I could feel my irritation rising. I dropped my keys on the table and leaned against the counter, trying to collect my thoughts before speaking. "We need to talk," I said finally, my voice more steady than I felt. She looked up, her expression neutral, almost too calm. "About what?" she asked, as if the words we had exchanged hours ago had vanished into thin air. "About everything," I said. "About last night, about how we ended up here, and what we're going to do moving forward. Her eyes flickered for a moment, maybe a hint of apprehension, but she quickly masked it. "I don't think we need to dwell on it," she replied softly. "It's just a misunderstanding." I shook my head. "It's more than that. It's about how we communicate, how we treat each other, and how we handle the hard stuff. We can't just sweep this under the rug and act like it didn't happen." She sighed, put her phone down. "Okay, Fine, let's talk." And so we did. Hours passed in a blur of words, emotions, and confessions. I told her how I felt when she dismissed my concerns, how it made me feel small, unseen, and unheard. I explained the fear that had settled over me, the anxiety that hadn't left my chest since the argument began. She listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes frowning, but I could tell she was processing everything. When it was her turn, she spoke about her own perspective, her fears, and her frustrations. She admitted that she hadn't realized how her words and actions had affected me. She confessed that she sometimes felt trapped between wanting to maintain independence and wanting to be close, and that tension often manifested in dismissiveness or withdrawal. By the time the sun began to set, the tension in the room had lifted slightly, though a subtle unease lingered. We hadn't resolved everything, but we had taken the first step toward understanding each other. In the following weeks, we tried to rebuild the trust that had been frayed. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where old patterns crept back in, and moments where I questioned whether we could truly move forward. But there were also moments of tenderness, long walks through the park, quiet dinners where conversation flowed easily, small gestures of care that reminded us why we had chosen each other in the first place. One evening, as we sat on the couch with a cup of tea, she reached over and took my hand. "I know we're not perfect," she said, her voice soft, "but I want us to work. I want to get better at this, at being us." I squeezed her hand in return, feeling a warmth that I hadn't felt in weeks. "Me too," I said. "We'll figure it out, one day at a time." As the weeks turned into months, we learned to navigate the tricky terrain of compromise and communication. I learned to voice my concerns without fear of dismissal, and she learned to listen without defensiveness. There were setbacks, of course, misunderstandings, arguments that left us both drained, but there were also breakthroughs that brought us closer than ever. One rainy afternoon, we found ourselves caught outside without an umbrella, laughing as we ran through puddles, soaked to the bone. I realized that these moments, unexpected, imperfect, and entirely real, were what truly mattered. The argument from months ago seemed distant, almost trivial compared to the bond we were strengthening through our daily lives. By the time we moved into a larger apartment a year later, we had built a foundation that was stronger than either of us had imagined. We had learned to trust not only each other, but ourselves, the capacity to forgive, to grow, and to remain committed despite challenges. Even now, as we sit together on quiet evenings, sharing stories from our days and laughing at the little things, I am reminded that relationships are never perfect. They are messy, complicated, and sometimes painful. But when two people choose to invest in understanding, care, and empathy, they can build something lasting, something that endures the storms and the trials that inevitably come. It's not about avoiding conflict or pretending that difficulties don't exist. It's about meeting each other halfway, acknowledging mistakes, and choosing connection over separation, even when it's hard. And in that choice, we found a depth of love and partnership that neither of us could have anticipated at the beginning of our journey. Every challenge we faced became a lesson. Every argument, a chance to communicate more clearly. Every moment of doubt, an opportunity to reinforce trust. And slowly, through these cumulative experiences, we discovered that what we had was worth every struggle, every tear, and every heartfelt conversation. Now, years later, I can look back on that dark period not with regret, but with gratitude. It was the time that forced us to confront our weaknesses, to speak honestly, and to embrace the complexities of being two imperfect people in a shared life. We are still learning, still growing, but we are doing it together. And that, more than anything, makes all the difference. Through it all, one thing has become clear. Love isn't just about the big, dramatic gestures. It's in the small, everyday choices to listen, to forgive, to hold each other's hand through storms, to celebrate victories together, and to keep showing up even when it would be easier to walk away. And that's why, despite all the hardships and heartaches, I am deeply, endlessly grateful for the journey we've taken together, and for the love that continues to grow with each passing day. If you enjoyed this story and want more real, heartfelt tales that make you feel every emotion, don't forget to like and subscribe. It truly motivates me to share even more stories with you.